Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still don't know what to make of what I saw last Thursday night. I've been going back and forth about whether to post this, but I need to tell someone who won't think I'm completely crazy. I work second shift at the manufacturing plant in Oxford, which means I'm usually driving home around 11:30 at night. I've made the same commute for almost 7 years now, so I know every curve and pothole on those back roads. My usual route takes me down Hullbrook Road towards Seymour. It's this winding country road that cuts through some pretty dense forest for a few miles. That night was like any other. I clocked out at 11, said goodnight to Mike at security, and headed to my truck. It's nothing fancy, just an '89 Ford pickup that served me well since I bought it from my uncle back in 2010. The heater works great in winter, and that's all that matters to me. The night was clear but dark. No moon that I remember. We'd had some rain earlier in the week, but the roads were dry. I remember because I'd been driving with my window cracked about an inch, enjoying the cool autumn air. The radio was playing some classic rock station, volume low. Just background noise, really. I'd been on Hullbrook for maybe 5 minutes, doing about 30 miles per hour because of all the curves. There's this one particular bend about halfway down where the road dips slightly before curving to the right. I always take it a little slower because occasionally deer will jump out there. The woods are thick on both sides, no houses for at least a mile in either direction. As I came around that bend, my high beams swept across something that made me instantly hit the brakes. My truck skidded slightly before coming to a stop, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Standing just off the pavement, maybe 3 feet from the road's edge, was something. I say something because my brain couldn't immediately process what I was seeing. At first glance, it looked like a person. It was standing upright on 2 legs, facing directly toward my truck. But as my headlights fully illuminated it, I realized this was no person, at least not any kind of person I've ever seen. This thing was tall. I'm guessing at least 7 feet, maybe more. It had this lanky build that reminded me of an NBA basketball player, but with proportions that were just wrong. Its arms hung down much lower than they should have, almost to its knees. The whole figure was completely black, not dark-skinned, but like a total absence of light, a perfect silhouette against the trees behind it. The moment my truck stopped, it took one deliberate step backward. The movement was fluid but strange, almost like it was surprised to be caught. Then it turned, not like you or I would turn, but in this unnaturally smooth motion, and slipped between the trees. The whole encounter lasted maybe 15 or 20 seconds at most, but it's burned into my memory like a photograph. I sat there for what felt like forever, my engine idling, hands still gripping the wheel. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking I should drive away immediately, but I couldn't make my foot press the gas pedal. Part of me wanted to turn around and go back the way I came, but that would have meant passing the spot where I'd seen it enter the woods. The rational part of my brain tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. A hunter, maybe? But who hunts at 11:30 at night dressed completely in black? No hunter I know would be out there on foot in the pitch dark without gear or a flashlight. And the way it moved, humans don't move like that. I finally managed to put the truck in gear and continue driving. I went slowly, maybe 15 miles per hour, constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the woods on both sides of the road. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the wheel with both hands to keep steady. That stretch of Hullbrook is only about 2 miles long, but it felt like 20 that night. When I finally reached the main road towards Seymour, I floored it all the way home. I remember checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see that thing running behind my truck. When I got home, I locked every door and window in the house before I could even take off my jacket. My wife was already asleep and I didn't wake her. What would I even say? "Hey, honey, I think I just saw a monster on Hullbrook Road." She'd think I was drunk or losing my mind. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying those 15 seconds over and over in my head, trying to convince myself I'd seen a person, or a bear standing on its hind legs, or literally anything else that would make sense. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face driving that road again, not yet. I spent most of the day on the internet, searching for any similar sightings in the area. That's when I started thinking about the location more carefully. That stretch of Hullbrook is surrounded by nothing but dense woods and game trails. It's less than 2 miles from the Hughes Satonic River, and it's pretty close to Kettletown State Park too. There's ample cover, plenty of food sources with all the deer and small game, and fresh water. If something wanted to remain hidden from people, that area would be perfect. I've lived in Connecticut my whole life and spent plenty of time in those woods hunting and fishing. I know what bears look like, what deer look like, what every normal animal in those forests looks like. This wasn't any of those. What keeps sticking with me is the impression that it had been about to cross the road when my truck came around the bend. The way it stood there, directly facing my headlights, and then that deliberate step backward. It was like I'd caught it in the middle of something. If I'd come around that curve 10 seconds later, I probably wouldn't have seen anything at all. I did end up going back to work the next day, but I've been taking the long way home, adding an extra 15 minutes to my commute to avoid that stretch of Hullbrook. My wife asked why I changed my route, and I just mumbled something about road construction. I've been trying to work up the courage to drive back there in daylight, maybe look for tracks or signs of something unusual. But every time I think about going, I get this knot in my stomach. What if it's still there? Worse, what if I find evidence that confirms what I saw wasn't human? The image of that figure is still so clear in my mind. The complete blackness of it, like it was cut out of the night itself. The unnatural length of those arms, the smooth, deliberate way it moved. These aren't things my mind would make up. I've always been a practical person. I don't believe in ghost stories or monsters in the woods, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't anything that's supposed to exist in the forests of Connecticut. Last night, I finally drove Hullbrook again. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there was nothing to be afraid of. The drive was uneventful until I reached that same curve. As my headlights swept across the trees, I felt this overwhelming sense that I was being watched. There was nothing there, no tall black figure, no movement in the trees. But the feeling was so intense, I had to force myself not to floor the accelerator. I've been thinking about that location more and more. Those woods connect to miles of undeveloped forest that stretches across multiple towns. There are old caves near the river that most people don't know about. It's the kind of place where something could live for years without being spotted, only occasionally crossing roads when it thought no one was around. I'm not saying I saw Bigfoot or some mythical creature. I don't know what I saw, but it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal native to these woods. The rational explanations, a hunter in strange clothing, a bear on its hind legs, a trick of the light, none of them fit what I witnessed. I keep wondering if I should report it to someone. But who? The police would think I was crazy or drunk. Wildlife authorities might take it more seriously, but what would I tell them? I saw a tall black figure with long arms that disappeared into the woods. Without evidence, it's just another crazy story. So I'm telling you all instead. I know this community understands that sometimes people see things they can't explain. I've read enough accounts here to know I'm not alone in having experienced something that defies conventional explanation. It's been a week now, and I still take the long way home most nights. When I do drive Hullbrook, I keep my high beams on the entire time and drive faster than I should. I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night is still out there in those woods, waiting for another opportunity to cross the road when it thinks no one is watching. The thing that scares me most isn't just what I saw. It's the implication that it's been there all along. How many times have I driven that road at night, completely unaware that something was watching me from just beyond the trees? How many other roads are there where these things might be hiding, just out of sight? I don't have answers, just questions that keep me awake at night. All I know is that stretch of Hullbrook Road will never look the same to me again. And sometimes, when I'm driving home on the main road and catch a glimpse of the dense tree line in my peripheral vision, I can't help but scan the darkness, half expecting to see that tall, black silhouette watching me pass by. Story 2. I still can't explain what I saw that day. It's been 20 years, and the memory hasn't faded at all. If anything, it's become clearer with time. It was early October of 2003. I'd been feeling pretty stressed from work. I was doing construction back then, and decided to take a day off to go fishing. The salmon were running, and the Kincolith River near the hatchery above the Y is one of my favorite spots. It's quiet, peaceful, and usually deserted on weekdays. I got there around 6 in the morning. The air was crisp, with that distinct fall chill that makes your breath visible. I remember the leaves had just started changing, creating this incredible canopy of reds and yellows above the riverbank. I'd packed light, just my rod, tackle box, and a small cooler with sandwiches and a couple of beers. The fishing was decent that morning. I'd caught 2 nice-sized salmon within the first couple of hours. I was standing thigh-deep in the river, working my way slowly upstream, when something caught my eye downstream, maybe 150 yards away. At first I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe driftwood caught in the current, but then it moved in a way that made me think it was a person. Someone swimming, maybe. That struck me as odd because that particular section was shallow, maybe 2.5 feet at most. Plus, the water was freezing. Who would be swimming there in early October? I cupped my hands around my mouth and called out, "Hey, you okay down there?" No response. The figure kept moving around in the water. I whistled as loud as I could and waved my arms over my head. Still nothing. That's when it stood up and looked directly at me. My first thought was, bear. Black bears are common in the area, and they sometimes fish for salmon. But something wasn't right. The way it stood, it wasn't a bear's posture. Bears have this hunched look when they stand on their hind legs. This was different. I stayed perfectly still, my fishing rod forgotten in my hands. The creature, I don't know what else to call it, went back to splashing around in the water. It seemed to be washing itself, or maybe playing. It would scoop water with its arms and rub it over its body, then shake like a dog. I slowly set my rod down on the bank and pulled out my small binoculars from my vest pocket. They weren't great, just cheap ones I'd picked up at a sporting goods store, but they helped me see better. What I saw made my skin crawl. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else entirely. The creature was covered in dark, almost black hair. Not fur like a bear, more like long hair that hung in matted clumps. It was massive, with broad shoulders and a bulky frame. I couldn't make out facial features clearly, but I could tell it had a flattened face, not a snout like a bear. For almost an hour I stood there watching it. I don't know why I didn't leave. Part of me was frozen in disbelief, and another part was just curious. It didn't seem aggressive or even aware of me after that initial look. Then it happened. The creature stood up fully, and I got a clear view. It was tall, well over 6 feet, maybe closer to 7. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. It stood upright on 2 legs, completely bipedal, with a slight stoop to its shoulders. There was no mistaking it for anything human, despite its vaguely humanoid shape. The most unsettling part, it seemed completely at ease. This wasn't some lost or confused animal. It moved with purpose, like it belonged there. After standing for a few moments, it simply turned and walked away from the river in the opposite direction from the village. It didn't hurry or look back. It just ambled into the trees and disappeared. I remained rooted to the spot for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My heart was pounding and my mouth had gone completely dry. I wasn't exactly scared during the encounter, more like in a state of shock or disbelief. But once it was gone, the fear hit me all at once. I packed up my gear in record time, practically throwing everything into my backpack. I kept looking over my shoulder as I made my way back to my truck. The forest that had seemed so peaceful that morning now felt oppressive, like something was watching me from between the trees. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? I'd sound crazy, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started researching online, looking up bear behaviors and other wildlife in the area. Nothing matched what I'd seen. About 3 weeks later, I heard that some surveyors working near the river had found large tracks. Not bear tracks, something else. They described them as human-like but much larger, with a different distribution of weight. The news spread quickly through our small community. That's when I finally told my story to a few close friends. To my surprise, they didn't laugh or dismiss it. One of them, Mike, said his grandfather had seen something similar back in the 70s in almost the same location. The strangest part came later that season. People in the village, including me, started hearing unusual sounds in the early morning hours, usually between 3 and 5 a.m. Deep, resonant sounds that weren't quite howls or calls, more like powerful vocalizations that carried through walls. They would last for 10 to 15 seconds, stop, then start again after a few minutes. This went on for about 2 weeks, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I've gone back to that fishing spot many times since then, always hoping or maybe fearing that I'd see it again. I never have, but I've found things. Broken branches too high for a human to reach, strange formations of sticks that don't occur naturally, and once, a distinct impression in the soft ground near the riverbank that looked like something large had sat there. I'm not claiming it was Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever name you want to give it. I don't know what it was, but I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a human. What bothers me most is how normal it seemed in that environment. This wasn't some creature frantically trying to hide from human contact. It was just going about its business, bathing in a river on an autumn morning, completely at home in the wilderness. I've become more observant since that day. When I'm in the woods, I notice things I never did before: broken twigs, disturbed undergrowth, strange smells that don't belong. I listen more carefully to the sounds of the forest, trying to distinguish between the ordinary and the other. Last summer, I was camping with my brother about 20 miles from the original spot. We were sitting by the fire when all the night sounds, insects, frogs, distant owls, suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest. My brother didn't notice, but I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Something was watching us from the darkness beyond our campfire. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its presence, as surely as I could feel the heat from the flames. We left the next morning, and I haven't been camping since. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was something science hasn't discovered yet. Some species that's managed to avoid documentation. Other times, I think about the local indigenous stories of wild men in the woods, creatures that exist somewhere between the natural and supernatural worlds. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know what I saw. And on some nights, when I'm lying in bed and hear a distant sound that doesn't quite fit, not a coyote or a wolf or any animal I can identify, I wonder if it's out there, moving through the darkness, as it has for who knows how long. The encounter changed me. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings. I still fish and hike, but I never go alone anymore, and I always feel like I'm being watched when I'm in the woods. The strangest thing about the whole experience, I wasn't terrified during the actual sighting. That came later. In the moment, I felt almost privileged, like I'd been allowed to glimpse something few people ever see, something ancient and intelligent that shares our world, but remains hidden in the margins. I've never reported my sighting officially. What would be the point? Without evidence, it's just another story. But I know what I saw that day on the Kincolith River. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right and carries sounds from the distant forest, I wonder if it remembers seeing me too. Story 3. I've kept this to myself for over 40 years now. People think you're nuts when you tell them something like this, so I just stopped bringing it up. But it still plays on my mind sometimes, especially when I hear about others who've seen similar things. It was early autumn of '81 when it happened. I was working as a surveyor in southern New South Wales, part of a team mapping out some undeveloped land in the mountains. Beautiful country out there, dense eucalyptus forests, rocky outcrops, deep gullies, the kind of wilderness that makes you feel small. There were 4 of us that day: me, Zach, Dave, Mick, and our supervisor, Keith. We'd been hiking since early morning, taking measurements and marking reference points. It was hot work, even though the summer heat had started to ease off. By midday, we'd made our way up one of the steeper slopes and were working along a ridgeline. Around 1 in the afternoon, Keith wanted to find some tree markers we'd set up the previous week. They were supposed to be about half a kilometer east of our position. Dave and Mick went with him, while I stayed behind to organize our equipment and take a breather. My boots had been giving me blisters, and I was grateful for the chance to sit down and rest my feet. I found a flat rock overlooking a gully that dropped away steeply below us. It was maybe a 60 or 70 meter descent to the bottom, not a cliff exactly, but steep enough that you'd have to be careful climbing down. The gully floor was scattered with boulders and fallen trees, with a small, seasonal creek running through it. Beyond that, the opposite slope was covered in thick brush and trees. I'd been sitting there maybe 10 minutes, drinking water and checking our coordinates on the map, when I noticed movement below. At first, I thought it was a kangaroo. We'd seen plenty of them throughout the day, but this was different. Something large was moving between 2 massive boulders about halfway up the opposite slope. I squinted, trying to get a better look. Whatever it was big, way too big for a kangaroo. My first thought was that it might be another surveyor or a hiker, but we hadn't seen anyone else all day, and we were pretty far from any walking trails. The curiosity got the better of me. I figured I had at least 20 minutes before the others came back, so I decided to get a closer look. I grabbed my water bottle and compass and started making my way down the slope. It was steeper than it looked, and I had to use tree trunks and rocks to brace myself as I descended. Little pebbles and dirt would slide out from under my boots, clattering down ahead of me. About halfway down, I paused to look across the gully again. That's when I saw it more clearly. Moving between the trees on the opposite slope was a large brownish figure. It was upright, but not quite standing straight like a person would. It had a kind of hunched posture with broad shoulders. My heart started pounding. I told myself it had to be a person, maybe someone wearing a brown jacket, but even from that distance, I could tell it was too big, too bulky. Something about the way it moved was just wrong. Instead of heading back up to safety like any sensible person would, I continued down to the gully floor. I guess I wanted to prove to myself that it was just a hiker or something I could explain. 27-year-old blokes don't always make the smartest decisions. When I reached the bottom, I crouched behind a boulder near the creek. The air felt cooler down there, and it was quieter. That strange, muffled quiet you get in gullies where the sounds from outside don't really penetrate. I could hear the trickle of water and not much else. From my new position, I had a clear view across to where I'd seen the figure. For a minute or two, I saw nothing. Then, about 30 meters away, on the lower part of the opposite slope, it emerged from behind a stand of trees. I'm not religious, but I swear to God, what I saw wasn't human. It was roughly 2 meters tall, maybe a bit more, covered in dark brown hair or fur. Not like a coat, like it was its actual covering. It had that hunched, powerful look, with shoulders that must have been nearly a meter wide. The head sat directly on those shoulders without much of a neck, like a footballer but more extreme. It was moving with purpose, heading deeper into the gully, parallel to the creek. I couldn't see its face, it was mostly turned away from me, but I could see massive arms that hung lower than a human's would, with large hands. I was frozen in place. My mouth had gone completely dry, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool air. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just crouched there, hardly breathing, watching this thing as it moved between the trees. It stopped suddenly, and I thought for a terrifying moment that it had spotted me. It turned slightly, not fully in my direction, but enough that I could see more of its profile. The face was set forward, with what looked like a heavy brow. I still couldn't make out details, but there was something unsettlingly not quite human about the proportions. Then it moved again, pushing into a particularly thick patch of brush. I could hear branches snapping and foliage rustling as it forced its way through. The sound echoed slightly in the gully, and that's when I finally snapped out of my trance. I needed to get back to the others. I started backing away, trying to keep my eyes on the spot where the creature had disappeared, while also watching my footing. When I felt I was far enough away, I turned and scrambled back up the slope as fast as I could. My heart was hammering, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing coming after me. The climb up seemed twice as long as the way down. By the time I reached the top, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and my legs were shaking. I collapsed onto the same rock where I'd been sitting earlier, gulping air and trying to process what I'd just seen. My mind was racing through possibilities. A bear? No, Australia doesn't have bears. A particularly large indigenous person? No way. Wrong build, wrong movement, wrong everything. Some kind of massive feral human living in the bush. That didn't make sense either. The only conclusion I kept coming back to was one I didn't want to accept. I'd seen something that shouldn't exist. I was still sitting there, trembling slightly, when the others returned about 10 minutes later. They were in good spirits, having found the markers they were looking for. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Dave said, dropping his backpack next to me. I hesitated, then decided to tell them. What else could I do? I'd just had the most shocking experience of my life. "I saw something down in the gully," I said, pointing. "Something big, like like a huge, hairy man or something." There was a moment of silence. Then Mick burst out laughing. "What are you on, mate?" he asked, grinning. "Been eating those funny mushrooms?" "I'm serious," I insisted. It was about 2 meters tall, covered in brown hair, walking on 2 legs. Keith looked concerned, but not in the way I wanted. "It's probably the heat, Zach. Did you drink enough water? Might be a touch of heat stroke making you see things." "I know what I saw," I said, feeling a flash of anger. I climbed down there for a closer look. It was real. It was moving through the brush down there. Dave peered over the edge of the slope. "Probably just a big roo, mate. They can look weird from certain angles." "It wasn't a bloody kangaroo," I snapped. "It was walking upright. Had arms, shoulders." Mick nudged Keith. "Think we should confiscate whatever he's smoking? Sounds like good stuff." They all laughed, and I realized they weren't going to believe me. Not in a million years. "Fine," I muttered. "Forget it." We went back to work after that, but I kept glancing down into the gully, half hoping to see the creature again so I could prove I wasn't crazy. But there was nothing there, just trees and rocks and shadows. Throughout the afternoon, I caught the others exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. At one point, I overheard Mick whisper to Dave, "Reckon he's on drugs or what?" The ride back to town that evening was uncomfortable. I sat silently in the back of Keith's 4-wheel drive, replaying what I'd seen over and over in my mind. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew I wasn't on drugs, suffering from heat stroke, or going mental. I'd seen something real, something that didn't fit into the neat categories of animals I'd learned about in school. That night at the motel, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those massive shoulders, that purposeful movement. I got up around 3 in the morning and wrote down everything I could remember, drawing rough sketches that didn't do justice to what I'd seen. The next day, the others had seemingly forgotten about it, or at least they pretended to. We went back to the same general area, but worked on a different section of the mountain. I kept scanning the landscape, hoping for another glimpse, but also dreading it. I never saw it again, but I never forgot either. In the weeks that followed, I quietly researched at the local library, looking for any similar sightings in the area. I found a few vague accounts, local Aboriginal stories about hairy men in the mountains, and a couple of newspaper clippings from the 60s about bushwalkers seeing strange figures in the forest. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me feel less alone. Over the years, I've heard about Yowie sightings in Australia, our version of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some of the descriptions match what I saw that day. I've never gone public with my story because I know exactly what would happen. The same thing that happened with my workmates: ridicule, disbelief, suggestions that I was drunk or high or crazy. But I know what I saw. It was 42 years ago now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. That massive, hair-covered figure moving through the trees, the sound of branches breaking under its weight, the primal fear that froze me in place. Whatever it was real. It was there in that gully with me. Sometimes I wonder if it knew I was watching, if it smelled me or heard me, if it chose to move away rather than confront me. I wonder if it's still out there, moving quietly through the wilderness, glimpsed occasionally by people who, like me, end up keeping their mouths shut for fear of being labeled crazy. All I know for certain is that on that autumn day in '81, I saw something in the Australian bush that shouldn't exist, and no amount of skepticism or ridicule will ever convince me otherwise. Story 4. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer in '96. My husband Mike and I used to be pretty adventurous. We'd go camping, hiking, floating down rivers, all that outdoor stuff most people just post about on social media, but never actually do. We weren't experts or anything, just regular people who enjoyed getting away from the city noise. This particular trip was supposed to be a nice, relaxing float down the Okeechee River in eastern Georgia. We put in near Midville with plans to take it easy, float for 2 days, and end up near Waynesboro. It's not exactly a tourist hotspot, mostly just local fishermen out there occasionally. The isolation was exactly what we wanted. We had our cheap little dome tent from REI, some basic camping supplies, fishing gear, and food packed in waterproof containers. Nothing fancy. The first day was absolutely perfect. Sunny but not too hot, just drifting along in our canoe, stopping to fish whenever we felt like it. Mike caught a couple small bass, and I just enjoyed watching the turtles sunning themselves on logs. Normal stuff, you know. As the sun started to set, we found what seemed like the perfect campsite. This U-shaped gravel bar that curved out into the water. Behind it was this steep dirt embankment, probably carved out by years of flooding. There was a small thicket of trees and bushes that gave us a nice sense of privacy. The spot felt secluded in a good way, peaceful, not threatening. We pulled the canoe up, set up our tent behind the thicket, and Mike got a small fire going. We cooked the fish he'd caught earlier, had some beans from a can, and shared a couple beers. Nothing special, but sitting there with the river gurgling nearby and fireflies starting to come out, it felt pretty damn close to perfect. We didn't see another person all day. The only sounds were natural ones: birds, insects, the occasional splash of a fish jumping. Around 10 o'clock, we put out the fire properly. Mike's always been paranoid about forest fires, brushed our teeth using river water, and crawled into our sleeping bags. I remember falling asleep almost instantly, listening to the night insects and the gentle sound of the river. I don't know exactly what time it was when I first woke up. My watch said something like 2 in the morning. What pulled me from sleep wasn't a noise exactly, but a pattern of sounds that didn't fit. Splashing, Not the gentle random splashes of fish jumping or turtles slipping into the water. This was methodical, heavy, like something substantial moving through the water, trying to be quiet, but not quite managing it. My first thought was that someone was crossing the river, maybe locals taking a shortcut in the middle of the night, but something felt off about it. The splashes were too heavy, too powerful for a normal person. I nudged Mike awake. He's usually a deep sleeper, but he must have sensed my fear because he woke up right away. "There's something in the water," I whispered, my mouth right against his ear. "Probably just a deer," he whispered back, but I could feel the tension in his body. The splashing stopped for a moment, then started again, closer to our side of the river. "What if it's a bear?" I whispered. "The food." We had hung our food pack from a tree branch away from the tent, like you're supposed to do, but bears have good noses, and they're strong. "Just stay quiet," Mike said. "If it is a bear, it'll probably just take the food and leave." We lay there, barely breathing, listening to whatever it was getting closer to the shore. Then it happened. The splashing suddenly changed. It became faster, heavier, more determined. Then there was the unmistakable sound of something large emerging from water onto land. But what came next? I still have trouble explaining it. Whatever it was, ran directly past our tent on 2 legs, not 4. 2. And the ground, I swear to God, the ground literally shook with each footstep. I don't mean the poetic kind of shaking, like I was so scared I was shaking. I mean the actual earth beneath our bodies vibrated from the impact of each step. I could feel it through my sleeping bag, through the tent floor, through my entire body. It was fast, much faster than something that heavy should be able to move. It passed by our tent in seconds, heading toward the embankment behind us. Then silence. Complete, oppressive silence. The insects stopped chirping. The frogs stopped croaking. Everything just stopped. That's when the smell hit us. I've tried to describe it to people before, but words don't really capture it. It was like dirty, wet fur mixed with rotting meat and something else, something musky and primal. The stench was so powerful it felt physical, like it could cling to your skin. My stomach instantly turned, and I had to fight not to gag. Mike and I didn't move, didn't speak, barely breathed. I know we were both thinking the same thing. Whatever was out there, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything we'd encountered before. We lay frozen like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The night sounds gradually returned. First a single cricket, then more joining in, then finally the full chorus of night insects. "What the hell was that?" I finally whispered. "I don't know," Mike replied, his voice shaking slightly. "But I think it's gone now." Neither of us wanted to go outside, but Mike finally worked up the courage. He grabbed his flashlight and the small hatchet we'd brought for cutting kindling. I followed him with the only weapon I could find, a can of bear spray we'd brought just in case. The night air was still heavy with that smell, though not as intense as before. Mike swept the flashlight beam across our campsite. Nothing seemed disturbed. Our food pack was still hanging from the tree where we'd left it. The canoe was untouched at the edge of the water. "Look for footprints," I suggested, my voice barely audible. We carefully examined the gravel bar, but the loose stones didn't hold clear impressions. At the edge of the water, there were some disturbed areas, but nothing distinct enough to identify what had come through. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We sat in the tent, backs against each other, listening to every sound, jumping at every snapped twig or rustled leaf. I kept the bear spray in my lap, though deep down, I knew it probably wouldn't do much against whatever had passed our camp. As soon as the first hint of dawn appeared, we packed up. No coffee, no breakfast, nothing. We just wanted out of there. We stuffed everything haphazardly into our bags, threw it all in the canoe, and pushed off into the river. I've never been so happy to leave a place in my life. For the rest of the trip down the river, we talked about what we'd experienced. Not a bear. Bears don't run on 2 legs, and they don't make the ground shake like that. Not a person. No human is heavy enough to create those vibrations. And that smell. Nothing normal smells like that. "Bigfoot," Mike finally said, almost embarrassed to suggest it. Before that night, I would have laughed at the idea, but after feeling those footsteps, smelling that stench, I couldn't dismiss it. Maybe was all I could say. We made it to our takeout point near Waynesboro by early afternoon. We were exhausted, jumpy, and still shaken. On the drive home, we promised each other we wouldn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe us? We'd sound crazy. That was 27 years ago now. Mike and I still go camping occasionally, but we stay closer to populated areas. We never went back to that stretch of the Okeechee. Some places, once you've experienced them a certain way, you just can't go back to. I've done a lot of reading since then, found forums and websites where people share similar experiences. Some people describe seeing the creature clearly, tall, covered in hair, walking upright. We never saw it. Part of me is grateful for that, but part of me still wonders what exactly passed by our tent that night. The scientific part of my brain has tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was some kind of atmospheric condition that made normal sounds seem more intense. Maybe the footsteps were actually small earth tremors. Maybe the smell was some kind of swamp gas. But deep down, I know what we experienced was real. Something massive, something powerful, something that walked on two legs past within feet of where we slept that night. Something that doesn't appear in biology textbooks or nature documentaries. I don't know what to call it. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, something else entirely. The name doesn't really matter. What matters is that it exists, and it's out there, moving through remote wilderness areas where people rarely go. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I still feel those vibrations, still smell that overwhelming stench, still hear those heavy footsteps racing past our tent. And I wonder if somewhere in the Georgia woods, that creature remembers us too, the humans who camped in its territory that summer night in '96. Story 5. I still get the chills when I think about what happened that day in July 2015, and I've never shared this publicly before. I've been a lurker on this forum for years, reading other people's encounters, but I guess it's time to get my own experience off my chest. Back then, I was working on a seismic crew near Peace River, Alberta. If you're not familiar with the work, it's basically cutting survey lines through the forest so drill rigs can come in later to do seismic testing for oil companies. It's hard, sweaty work, but the pay was decent for a 23-year-old with just a high school diploma. Our crew that day was small, just me, Kyle, and Denny. All of us were pretty young, in our early 20s. We'd been dropped off about 40 kilometers north of Peace River that morning, in this thick, dense forest that seemed to go on forever. The mosquitoes were brutal that day. I remember having to constantly wipe them off my arms, even though I was coated in repellent. The heat was oppressive too, probably around 28 degrees Celsius, and the humidity made it feel like you were breathing through a wet towel. We started cutting around 8 in the morning, following the marked path our survey team had flagged earlier in the week. It was a pretty standard operation. Kyle and I were on chainsaws, cutting down the smaller trees and brush, while Denny followed behind with a machete, clearing out the smaller stuff we missed. We were making good progress, joking around about the party we were planning to hit up in town that weekend. About 2 hours in, I noticed something off. There was this smell. At first, I thought maybe we'd come across a dead animal, not uncommon in the bush. But this was different, more intense, like rotten meat left in the sun for days, but somehow worse. I looked at Kyle, and I could tell from his face he smelled it too. "What the hell is that?" he shouted over the noise of our saws. I shrugged and kept cutting, figuring we'd move past whatever dead thing was causing the stench. But the smell just got stronger as we continued down the line. My stomach was starting to turn, and the heat wasn't helping. That's when we heard it. The sound of trees snapping somewhere off to our right, deeper in the forest. Not like when we cut them down with our saws, but like something was pushing them over, breaking them. I killed my chainsaw, and Kyle did the same. In that sudden silence, the forest felt wrong. You know how normally when you stop making noise in the woods, you start to hear birds, insects, all that natural background noise. There was none of that, just dead silence, except for more cracking wood and then this sound. I don't know how to describe it properly, like a low grumble or growl, but deeper than any animal I've ever heard. It made the hair on my arms stand up, and I felt this cold wave wash over me despite the heat. Denny had caught up to us by then. "You guys hear that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. Before either of us could answer, there was this tremendous boom about 30 meters ahead of us on the line. A tree, a decent-sized one, probably 8 inches thick, had just fallen over. No wind, no reason, just fell. That's when I saw it. I'll never forget what came out onto our cut line. It was massive. I'm 6'1", and this thing would have towered over me by at least 2 feet. Huge, black, covered in hair, walking on 2 legs. Its chest was as wide as a barrel, with these long arms hanging down past its knees. I remember noticing patches of lighter-colored hair on its shoulders and upper back, but it was the face I can't get out of my mind. Not quite human, not quite animal. And when it saw us, it pulled back its lips and showed its teeth. Not like an animal snarling, but almost like it was expressing hatred, contempt, like we didn't belong there, and it wanted us to know it. None of us moved. I couldn't breathe. My chainsaw felt impossibly heavy in my hands. The creature took a step toward us, and then it did something that still haunts my dreams. It reached out and slammed its hand against a nearby tree with such force that I heard the wood crack. The tree, a healthy one, not dead or rotting, actually bent from the impact. Kyle dropped his saw and ran, just turned and bolted back down the line we'd cut. That broke the spell for Denny and me, and we took off after him. I've never run so fast in my life. I was maybe 20 meters into my sprint when my boot caught on a wet log, and I went down hard, face first into the mud. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a second, I couldn't move. That's when I heard it behind me, crashing through the willows, moving fast, too fast. I scrambled to my feet, not even bothering to look back, certain I was about to feel its hand grab the back of my neck. The sound was so close I could hear its breathing, heavy, not like a person, more powerful. I swear I could feel its breath on my neck as I finally got my footing and started running again. I don't remember most of that run, just fragments, branches whipping my face, slipping in mud, my lungs burning. We didn't stop until we hit the gravel road where our truck was parked, about half a kilometer away. Kyle was already there, and we found Denny huddled by a culvert, crying. Actual tears. This was a guy who'd once punched a drunk logger for spilling his beer. We were all shaking, covered in mud and scratches. Nobody wanted to say what we'd seen. I think we were afraid saying it out loud would make it more real. Finally, Kyle pulled out his radio and called our foreman, told him we'd spotted a grizzly bear and weren't comfortable finishing the line. It was a lie we'd all silently agreed on. Who'd believe the truth? Our foreman wasn't happy, but he sent a truck to pick us up. On the ride back to camp, none of us spoke. The driver tried to make conversation, asking about the bear, but we just gave short answers. It was big, came out of nowhere, too close. That night at camp, we made a pact not to talk about what we'd really seen. We were scared of being laughed at, of losing our jobs, of being known as the guys who saw Bigfoot. But mostly, I think we were trying to convince ourselves it hadn't happened. About a month later, I heard through the grapevine that they'd sent a new crew to finish our block. Apparently, they found large footprints in the mud and a bunch of trees that had been ripped up. Not cut, not fallen naturally, but literally pulled out of the ground. The story was, they'd finished the job in record time and refused to talk about what they'd found there. I stuck with seismic work for another 2 years after that, but I never went back north of Peace River. I made sure of that. I'd take lower paying jobs if it meant staying away from that area. I still dream about it sometimes, that massive black shape stepping onto our line, those teeth. The hatred in its eyes, the crack of that tree as it hit it, the feeling of absolute certainty that I was going to die as I lay face down in the mud. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a bear, maybe the isolation and heat got to us, but deep down, I know what I saw. And sometimes when I'm hiking or camping and hear a tree knock or a loud crash in the bush, I don't investigate. I leave immediately, because that day taught me something important. We're not always welcome in the deep woods. There are things out there that consider us intruders, and some of them are powerful enough to make sure we know it. I've read a lot about Sasquatch encounters since then, trying to make sense of what happened. Some people describe them as curious, even peaceful. But what we encountered that day wasn't curious. It was territorial, aggressive. It wanted us gone. And to this day, whenever I smell something rotten in the woods or notice that unnatural silence fall, my body remembers before my mind does. My heart races, my palms sweat, and I'm right back there on that line, staring at something that shouldn't exist, something that hated us just for being there. Kyle left the industry entirely after that season. Last I heard, he was working construction in Edmonton. Denny stuck with it longer than I did, but he transferred to a crew that works exclusively in the prairies. No forests, no trees. As for me, I work in the oil fields now. Open spaces where you can see for miles in every direction. No surprises, no dark shadows between trees, and absolutely no line cutting in the deep bush north of Peace River. Sometimes I think about reporting what happened, making it official somehow. But then I remember the look in that creature's eyes, and I wonder if drawing more attention to it, bringing more people into its territory, would only make things worse. So I've kept quiet. Until now. I'm still not sure why I'm sharing this today. Maybe because enough time has passed. Maybe because I need someone to believe me, or maybe because people should know what's out there, hidden in the places we think we've mapped and tamed. All I know for sure is that I'll never forget what I saw that day, and no matter how many years pass, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder when I hear branches breaking in the distance. Story 6. I never thought I'd be sharing this publicly, but after what happened 2 weeks ago, I need to get this off my chest. My family has been dealing with this thing for 3 generations now, and I'm tired of pretending it's not real. I live in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, same house I grew up in. It's a quiet neighborhood, nothing special, just rows of houses built close together with a narrow gully running behind them. The gullies filled with brush and trees, creating this perfect hidden pathway between yards. I never thought much about it as a kid. Now I can't stop thinking about what use is it. My first encounter happened when I was 10 years old. It was summer, probably around 1976. My sister Kathy and I were playing on this old tire swing Dad had hung from the oak tree near the back fence. We were taking turns pushing each other, just being normal kids. I remember it was getting close to dinner time because the sun was starting to set, making everything look golden. I was on the swing and Kathy was pushing me, then suddenly, nothing. No more pushes. I turned around to ask why she'd stopped, but she was gone. A second later, I heard the screen door slam and my mom yelling, "What on earth?" I jumped off the swing and ran inside too. Kathy was hysterical. Mom was trying to calm her down while she sobbed about something watching us from the trees at the edge of our yard. Dad grabbed his flashlight and went out to look. When he came back, his face was different, tight, like he was trying to look normal but couldn't quite manage it. He said he'd found some unusual tracks near our back fence, big ones, too big for a dog or anything else that should have been in our neighborhood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Kathy's face, how genuinely terrified she looked. She wasn't the type to make stuff up for attention. The next morning, I was taking out the trash when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow between the houses across the street. Then it moved. It walked. No, not walked exactly. It sort of swayed across the driveway. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark hair, and walking upright on 2 legs, but not like a person walks, It was bow-legged, with this weird side-to-side rocking motion in its shoulders, like it wasn't built to walk upright but was doing it anyway. I froze, couldn't scream, couldn't move. It didn't look at me, just kept going until it disappeared behind the Thompsons' garage. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran inside and told my parents. They believed me, but told me not to tell anyone else. "People will think we're crazy," Mom said. For years after that, things were mostly quiet. Occasionally we'd hear strange noises at night, heavy footsteps in the gully, branches breaking when there was no wind, but we never talked about it outside the family. Then came April 18th, 2002. I was 36 by then, married with 2 kids of my own. We'd bought my parents' house when they moved to Florida, partly because I loved the neighborhood and partly because housing was affordable. My husband Mike grew up just a few blocks away, so it felt right. That night changed everything. It was around 11 p.m. and I was letting our dogs out for their final bathroom break before bed. We had 2 German shepherds, Rusty and Bear, good, brave dogs that never backed down from anything. It was unseasonably warm that night, the kind of spring evening where everything feels alive. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light that I didn't need the porch light on. The dogs trotted into the yard, doing their usual perimeter check before getting down to business. I was scrolling through my phone, half paying attention, when the dogs suddenly went silent. That caught my attention immediately. They always made some noise, sniffing or rustling around. I looked up and saw them both frozen, staring at the corner of the yard where it meets the Petersons' property. That's when I saw it. Standing partly behind a tree in the Petersons' yard was something. In the moonlight, I could make out its outline. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. Its shoulders were massive, easily twice as wide as my husband's, and he's not a small man. It was just standing there, watching. I couldn't make out facial features, but I could feel it looking at me. The security light on the Petersons' garage suddenly clicked on, triggered by movement. For just a second, I could see it clearly. It was covered in dark, matted hair. Not fur exactly, more like really long human hair, but all over its body. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, and its face, God, its face, not quite human, not quite animal. A massive brow ridge shadowed its eyes, but I could see them reflecting the light, yellowish, intelligent. Its nose was flat and wide, and its jaw jutted forward more than a human's should. The dogs saw it too. Bear, always the braver one, took 2 steps forward and let out a low growl. What happened next still gives me nightmares. This thing, this creature, moved with impossible speed for something so large. It leapt from behind the tree and grabbed onto the trunk of another tree about 15 feet away, then swung itself forward into the yard. It moved like it weighed nothing. The dogs went from brave to terrified in an instant. They both turned and ran toward the house, actually pushing past me to get inside. I've never seen them so scared. Not during thunderstorms, not when the neighbor's pit bull got loose, never. I stood there frozen, watching as this thing moved into the yard. It wasn't running at me, but it wasn't retreating either. It was almost like it was curious. It tilted its head slightly, studying me. I remember thinking absurdly that it looked like it was trying to figure me out, just as much as I was trying to figure it out. Then our eyes met. I swear to God, there was intelligence there. Not animal intelligence, something else. It knew I was afraid. It knew what it was doing. The moment broke when headlights swept across the yard as Mike pulled into the driveway. The creature turned and with 2 enormous strides reached the tree line and disappeared into the gully behind our houses. Mike found me still standing there, shaking. When I told him what happened, he didn't laugh or tell me I was seeing things. Instead, he got very quiet and then said, "My uncle used to talk about something in these woods. No one believed him." That night, Mike told me stories I'd never heard before. His family, his uncle, his grandfather, they'd seen it too, over the decades. always in this neighborhood, always using that same gully path behind the houses. They called it the Walker because of its distinctive gait, exactly the same way I'd seen it move when I was 10. After that night, the incidents increased. We'd hear heavy impacts against our brick house late at night, not like someone knocking, more like something large bumping against the walls, sometimes hard enough to make the windows rattle. We installed security cameras, but they either caught nothing or mysteriously stopped working when the strange things happened. Mike's theory is that it's territorial, that this thing, this Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, has been using the gully as a pathway for decades, maybe centuries. And as our neighborhood expanded, we built houses on what it considers its territory. The most terrifying part is that my daughter Emily started having nightmares about a big, hairy man watching her through her bedroom window. Her room is on the second floor. 2 weeks ago, it happened again. Kathy was visiting. She lives in Ohio now, but comes back every few months. We were sitting on the back deck, having coffee and catching up. It was around dusk, that time when everything starts getting hazy and shadows grow longer. We were mid-conversation when Kathy suddenly stopped talking and stared past me, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her mouth. I turned to look, and there it was, at the edge of our yard, partially hidden by the shed, just standing there, watching us. In the 30-plus years since our first encounter, it hadn't changed at all. Same massive height, same strange posture, same intelligent eyes. For several seconds, none of us moved. Then Kathy whispered, "You still see it too?" And I nodded, unable to speak. It shifted its weight, and the movement broke our paralysis. We both stood up so quickly, we knocked over our chairs. The noise seemed to startle it, or maybe it was just done observing us, because it turned and melted into the trees with that same fluid, impossible movement I remembered. Kathy and I held each other, both of us shaking. "All these years," she said, "I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that maybe it was just some neighbor in a costume or something." 3 generations, I told her. Mike's family has seen it too. Here's the strangest part. We've talked to a few neighbors over the years, carefully broaching the subject. Most changed the topic immediately, looking uncomfortable. But a few have admitted to similar experiences. Mrs. Donovan, who's lived here since the 50s, told me that everyone knows about it, but no one talks about it, like it's some unspoken neighborhood secret. I've researched Bigfoot sightings online. There are thousands of accounts, but very few describe what we've experienced, a creature that returns to the same location repeatedly over decades. Most sightings are one-off encounters in remote areas. This thing has made our suburban neighborhood its home. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because after the encounter 2 weeks ago, I realized it's not going away. This is our reality. Sometimes I wonder if we should move. But where would we go, and would it follow us? Does it know us now after all these years? All I know is that tonight, like every night, I'll check the locks twice. I'll make sure the dogs are inside, and I'll try not to look too hard at the tree line behind our house, where the gully runs dark and deep, and something walks that shouldn't exist. Story 7. I've debated whether to share this for years. Most people I've told think I'm crazy or making it up, but I swear on everything I care about that what I'm about to tell you actually happened. It was December 7th, 2003. I remember the date clearly because I just dropped off my 2 boys at their dorm near Sul Ross State University in Alpine, Texas. Both of them are in the National Guard, and I couldn't be prouder. They'd been home for the weekend, and I'd driven them back that Sunday evening. The drive back home is about 3 hours, and I was heading east on State Highway 118. It must have been around 10 at night. I'm always careful driving through that area since it's the Davis Mountains foothills, and there's all kinds of wildlife that can jump out in front of your car without warning. I had my brights on and was going maybe 55, keeping a good eye on both sides of the road. I've been hunting and camping all through Texas for over 30 years, so I'm pretty familiar with what's out there. I know what deer eyes look like in headlights, what a mountain lion's shape is like in the darkness, all that stuff. What I saw that night wasn't any of that. I was approaching this sharp bend in the road, about 100 yards west of this old ranch access road that's rarely used anymore. That's when I first noticed something reflecting my headlights. It was yellow, like eye shine, but it was way higher than where you'd expect to see deer eyes. My first thought was maybe it was a reflector on a fence post or something, but as I got closer, I realized there was no fence there. As I approached the bend, my headlights finally caught it fully, and I immediately felt this cold sensation wash over me. There was something standing just off the right shoulder of the road, not completely on the road, but right at the edge where the asphalt meets the dirt. The lower half of whatever it was remained hidden by this steep embankment, but I could clearly see its upper body. I instinctively slowed down to about 20 miles per hour. I wasn't thinking clearly. Part of me was trying to process what I was seeing, while another part was just focused on not driving off the road. This thing was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had shoulders broader than any human I've ever seen. They were rounded, not squared off like a person wearing football pads, but naturally massive. Its arms were stretched outward slightly, not straight down by its sides, and not outstretched like it was going to grab something, just positioned outward a bit. What really stuck with me was the hair. It had this hair hanging down from its arms that must have been 4 or 5 inches long. The hair looked black in my headlights, though it could have been dark brown. It's hard to tell colors accurately at night. The arms themselves bent slightly at the elbows, not like it was in a defensive posture, just standing there. Its face was flat, not flat like pressed against something, but flat like that's just how it was structured. The back of its head had this somewhat domed shape. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't like any animal I recognized, and it definitely wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong. The strangest part was how completely still it remained. Most animals, even ones that freeze in headlights, will show some small movements, breathing, slight adjustments in posture, something. This thing was like a statue. It didn't blink, didn't shift weight, nothing. It just stood there watching me as I drove past. I was close enough that I passed within 30 or 40 feet of it. Close enough to see details, but far enough that I thank God I didn't have to get any closer. Its body looked thick and powerful, not fat, but solid, like it was made of dense muscle under all that hair. I had my window partially rolled down despite the December chill, because I sometimes get drowsy on long drives and the fresh air helps. As I passed by, there was this brief moment when a smell hit me. It wasn't overwhelming, just a faint whiff, but it was distinct, like rotten garbage or maybe sulfur. Kind of like if you've ever smelled a wet dog that rolled in something dead, but worse. It was gone as quickly as it came. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to keep driving, and that's exactly what I did. I actually sped up once I was past it, watching in my rear-view mirror until the bend in the road took it out of sight. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. For the next hour of my drive, I kept trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was someone in a costume playing a prank, but who would stand out in the middle of nowhere at 10 o'clock at night in December, just on the off chance a car might drive by? And the size of it. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing's eyes were well above my height. The proportions weren't human. Could it have been a bear standing on its hind legs? I've seen plenty of bears, and this wasn't one. The posture was all wrong. The shape of the head wasn't right, and bears don't typically just stand perfectly still watching cars pass by. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying the image in my head, trying to make sense of it. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd been tired, and my mind had played tricks on me. The only way to put it to rest was to go back in daylight. So the next day, I drove back to that same spot. It took me a while to find the exact location because the highway looks different in daylight, but I found it by recognizing that old ranch access road. I pulled over and got out of my truck. The first thing I noticed was how isolated this area really is. There's nothing out there, no houses, no businesses, just wilderness. The terrain is rough, deep gullies, loose rocks, dry creek beds. It's not a place anyone would choose to walk around, especially at night. I approached the spot where I'd seen the creature standing. The embankment was steep, maybe a 5-foot drop from the shoulder of the road down to the rough terrain below. I carefully made my way down and immediately noticed something odd. There was disturbed dirt and leaves on the slope, like something heavy had stepped there and slid down a bit. The pattern didn't look like typical animal tracks, but it was definitely something. I looked around the surrounding area for about an hour, but didn't find any definitive footprints. The ground was too rocky and hard in most places to hold clear impressions. What I did find, though, was a sense of just how impossible it would be for a person to navigate this terrain at night. There were places where you could easily break an ankle if you took a wrong step. Steep drops that weren't visible until you were right on top of them. As I stood there in the daylight, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, I became absolutely certain of one thing. What I saw wasn't human, and it wasn't any known animal that should be in these mountains. I've spent 3 decades hunting and camping all over Texas. I know a deer from a coyote, from a mountain lion. I know what a bear looks like, what a wild hog looks like. This was something else entirely. The only thing that makes any sense, as crazy as it sounds, is that what I saw that night was a Bigfoot. I never believed in that stuff before. I always thought Bigfoot was just stories people made up or mistakes, someone seeing a bear in poor light. But after that night, I don't know anymore. What else could it have been? It was standing there like it was keeping watch, like it belonged there in the darkness. The area where I saw it is remote, but not completely uninhabited. There are ranches scattered throughout the region. The university isn't too far away, and people do drive that highway. But the actual location was a perfect spot for something to remain hidden, right off the road, but with immediate access to rough country where people rarely go. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I kept seeing those yellow reflective eyes in my dreams. I'd wake up sweating, thinking about what might have happened if I'd stopped my truck, or if my car had broken down right there. What would it have done? I've only told a few people about this. My wife, my brother, and a close friend who's into that kind of stuff. My wife believes me because she knows I'm not one to make up stories. My brother thinks I saw a bear, and my mind filled in the blanks. My friend got way too excited and wanted me to contact some Bigfoot research group, which I refused to do. I don't want to become that crazy guy. But it's been nearly 20 years now, and I still think about that night regularly. I still drive that road sometimes when visiting my kids, and I never do it at night anymore. I always make sure I'm through that area well before sunset. I've tried researching if anyone else has seen something similar in that area, but people are reluctant to talk about these things. I did find a few vague reports of strange sightings in the Davis Mountains over the years, but nothing as clear or detailed as what I experienced. The thing that still gets me when I think about that night isn't just what I saw. It's the feeling I had. There was this overwhelming sense that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation. It wasn't just fear, though I was definitely afraid. It was this profound feeling of being completely out of my depth, like stumbling across something ancient and powerful that humans aren't supposed to know about. I can't prove what I saw. I didn't have a camera. This was 2003, before everyone had smartphones. And even if I had, I was too shocked to think about taking a picture. All I have is my memory of those few seconds, but they're as clear to me now as they were that night. So that's my story. I saw something unexplainable standing on the side of State Highway 118 in the Davis Mountains of West Texas on a December night. Something big, something watching, something that shouldn't be there. And to this day, I still slow down at that bend in the road, still glance nervously at that spot, and still wonder what exactly was standing there, watching me drive by. Story 8. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened 3 nights ago. I've barely slept since then. My son thinks I should see a doctor, but I know what I saw. I'm 74 years old. I've lived in this house for almost 30 years, and I've never once had hallucinations or anything like that. My mind is as sharp as it's ever been. It was Wednesday, March 12th. I remember because I'd just gotten off the phone with my sister earlier that day. We always talk on Wednesdays. The weather had been unusually warm for March, almost 60 degrees during the day, but by evening it had cooled down considerably. I'd made myself a cup of chamomile tea around 9:30 and was getting ready for bed. I always check that the doors are locked before turning in, old habits from when my husband was still alive, and we'd do our nightly security check together. I was at the front door, making sure it was locked properly. Our neighborhood on 49th Street is generally quiet and safe, but you can never be too careful these days. The porch light was on, casting that yellow glow across my front yard. The moon was nearly full that night too, so visibility was pretty good despite it being around 10 o'clock. I have one of those doors with a large glass panel in the top half. I was about to turn away when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from the maple tree at the edge of my yard. But then it moved. What I'm about to describe, I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head since that night, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but they weren't. I know what I saw. There was something walking down 49th Street. Not on the sidewalk, but right in the middle of the road. Something huge. Even from my doorway I could tell it was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even close to being a person. It looked like, God, I don't even know how to describe it properly. Like a giant ape, but walking upright. It had this forward hunch to its posture, not like it was struggling to walk, but like that was just how its body was built. Its arms were incredibly long. They hung down almost to its knees. Everything about it was just wrong, too big, too powerful looking to be human. I froze with my hand still on the doorknob. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was walking with purpose, not stumbling around or looking confused. It moved deliberately, each stride covering what must have been 4 or 5 feet. It was staying in the darker parts of the street, where the streetlights didn't quite reach. But with the moonlight, I could still make out its silhouette clearly. The thing that disturbs me most, even now as I'm typing this, is how it never once turned its head. It just kept staring straight ahead, like it knew exactly where it was going. It was focused, determined, not like an animal that's wandered into a residential area by mistake. This thing was moving with intent. I stood there watching it through my glass door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would hear me. But it never reacted to me or anything else around it. No cars drove by during those moments, thank goodness, because I can't imagine what would have happened if someone had come across this creature while driving. The whole encounter probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. It moved from one end of my view to the other, and then it was gone, continuing down 49th Street toward the wooded area that separates our neighborhood from the highway. Once it was out of sight, I practically collapsed against the door. My legs were shaking so badly I had to sit down right there on the floor. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I tell them? That I saw Bigfoot strolling down my street? They'd think I was just a confused old lady. Instead, I called my son in Washington. It was already late, after 10, but I knew he'd still be up. When he answered, I could hear the TV in the background. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told him what I'd seen, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He kept asking if I was feeling all right, if I'd taken my blood pressure medication, if I needed him to call a neighbor to check on me. "Mom," he said, "there are no apes in suburbia. Maybe it was a bear. They can stand on their hind legs." But I know what a bear looks like. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a costume either. No costume could capture the fluid, powerful way this thing moved. The proportions were all wrong for a human. And why would anyone be walking around our neighborhood at night in an ape costume anyway? I barely slept that night. I checked all the locks twice more and even pushed my heavy reading chair against the front door. I kept the bedside lamp on and jolted awake at every little sound. The refrigerator humming, the house settling, the occasional car passing by. The next morning, I went outside to check if there was any evidence. I don't know what I expected to find, footprints maybe, but the ground was dry and the asphalt wouldn't show tracks anyway. There was nothing unusual, just the same quiet street I've lived on for decades. I decided to take a walk down to where I'd seen the creature heading. The wooded area isn't very large, maybe 3 acres, but it's dense enough that local kids like to pretend it's a forest. I didn't actually go into the trees. My hiking days are long behind me. But I stood at the edge, looking for something. Broken branches, fur caught on a twig. Again, nothing seemed out of place. When I got back home, I called Marge from next door to ask if she'd heard or seen anything unusual the night before. She hadn't. Neither had the Johnsons across the street or anyone else I spoke with. By that afternoon, I was starting to doubt myself. Maybe it had been a shadow, a trick of the light. Maybe I was more tired than I'd realized. But then I remembered the deliberate way it moved, the impossible length of its arms, the massive breadth of its shoulders. No, I hadn't imagined it. I've lived in this house since 1995. In all those years, I've seen plenty of wildlife, deer, foxes, the occasional coyote. We're not exactly rural, but we're close enough to undeveloped areas that animals sometimes wander through. But nothing like what I saw that night. I've spent the last few days researching online, Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch, strange creatures. The internet is full of stories. Some seem credible, others are obviously hoaxes. None of them quite match what I saw. The descriptions are similar, tall, ape-like, walking upright, but the circumstances are usually different. Most sightings happen in forests, mountains, remote areas, not on a suburban street with streetlights and houses 20 feet apart. My son called me again yesterday. He's worried about me, says I should see Dr. Mitchell, get checked out. Just to be safe, Mom, he said. But I know what he's thinking, that his mother is losing it, seeing monsters in the dark. I haven't told anyone else about this. Who would believe me, a 74-year-old woman claiming she saw an 8-foot-tall ape man walking down her street? I'd sound crazy. Maybe I am crazy, but I know what I saw. Last night I sat by my front window for hours, watching the street. Nothing appeared. I'll do the same tonight, and probably tomorrow night too. Part of me hopes I see it again, just to prove to myself that I'm not imagining things, but a bigger part of me is terrified at the thought of that creature returning. What was it doing here? Where did it come from? Where was it going? These questions keep circling in my mind. We're miles from any real wilderness. The closest thing to a forest is that small wooded patch, and it's surrounded by subdivisions and shopping centers. The weirdest part is that it seemed so purposeful. It wasn't lost or confused. It was walking like it had somewhere specific to be, like it knew this area, maybe even better than I do. I've lived a long, mostly ordinary life. I raised 2 children, buried a husband, worked as a library assistant for 32 years. Nothing extraordinary has ever happened to me, until now, and I don't know what to do with this experience. Who do you tell when you see something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, especially not on 49th Street in a neighborhood of ranch houses and well-kept lawns? I keep the doors locked all the time now. I've started closing all the blinds at dusk. My son thinks I'm developing anxiety. Maybe I am. But how are you supposed to feel after seeing something like that? 3 nights have passed, and I haven't seen it again. But every time a shadow moves across my yard or a branch scrapes against the side of the house, my heart races. I find myself standing at that same front door, peering through the glass, both dreading and hoping for another glimpse. The strangest thing is that I don't feel threatened exactly. The creature never made any aggressive moves. It didn't approach my house or any other house that I could see. It just walked, steady and determined, like it had business elsewhere. But there's something deeply unsettling about knowing such a thing exists in our world, in my world, on my street, and no one else seems aware of it. I've started carrying my phone with me everywhere, even just moving from room to room in my own house. If I see it again, I want to have evidence. Though I wonder if a photo would even convince anyone. These days, with all the technology for faking images, would a blurry picture of a dark shape really change any minds? Tonight, as I sit here typing this, I can see the street through my window. It looks so normal, so familiar. Cars parked along the curb, porch lights glowing, a neighbor walking his dog. Nothing out of the ordinary, but I know what I saw, and I can't unsee it. I can't forget the way it moved, the impossible proportions of its body, the sense of purpose in its stride. Whatever it was real. And it was here, on 49th Street, right outside my door. Maybe it won't come back. Maybe it was just passing through, following some path only it knows about. But I'll be watching and waiting, because once you've seen something like that, how can you ever look at the world the same way again? Story 9. I've debated for months whether to share this. I'm not the type who believes every shadow in the woods is something supernatural. I hunt, fish, and have spent most of my life outdoors in Wyoming. I know what a bear looks like at distance. I know elk, deer, and moose, silhouettes like the back of my hand. What I saw last summer wasn't any of those things, and it's been eating at me ever since. This happened in late July last year when I was 15. I'd spent the afternoon at my buddy Jake's house about 3 miles outside Buffalo, playing video games and messing around like we always did during summer break. His family lives in one of those newer developments that backs up against national forest land. My house is further up the mountain, another 2 miles past a series of gentle hills. It was around 7 in the evening when I finally headed home. My parents wanted me back before dark, but the sun wouldn't set for at least another hour and a half, so I wasn't worried. I'd made this ride hundreds of times on my blue specialized mountain bike. It was basically automatic for me. The route home follows this winding country road that cuts through patches of pine forest and small meadows. It's beautiful but isolated. There's maybe 4 or 5 houses total scattered along the entire route. And once you get past the halfway point, it's just wilderness until you reach our property. I remember it was unusually quiet that evening. Normally you'd hear birds, the occasional car, or distant farm equipment. But there was this weird stillness that I only noticed in hindsight. At the time, I was just pedaling along, thinking about the new game Jake had shown me and whether I could convince my parents to buy it for my birthday. I'd just reached the beginning of the first real hill, locals call it Miller's Rise, when I heard something off to my left, in the denser part of the woods. It wasn't loud, just a sort of deliberate movement through underbrush. My first thought was deer. They're everywhere around here, and evening is when they start moving around. I slowed down a bit, curious. I always liked spotting wildlife, and I figured I'd see a doe, or maybe an elk, crossing between the trees. I actually stopped pedaling completely and put one foot down on the gravel shoulder, squinting into the woods to get a better look. That's when I saw it. About 100 yards away, moving parallel to the road through a semi-clearing in the trees, was something I still can't fully explain. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as a person, maybe a hiker or someone from one of the properties, but I knew instantly that was wrong. This thing was massive, not just tall but substantial, and the way it moved was what really caught my attention. People walk with a sort of up and down bobbing motion, right? Our heads rise and fall with each step. This thing moved completely differently. It had this smooth, powerful stride that covered ground frighteningly fast without the usual human bounce. Each step seemed to cover 4 or 5 feet, but it didn't look rushed or awkward. I've played basketball my whole life and seen plenty of tall people. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, probably taller. Its proportions were all wrong for a human. Longer arms, broader shoulders, a slightly stooped posture, but still impossibly large. The other detail that burned into my memory was the color. It wasn't the dark brown or black I'd always imagined these things would be from the documentaries or stories. It was covered in this light sandstone-colored hair, like the color of the bluffs around here after a dry summer. The hair wasn't super long and shaggy like you see in movies, but more like a uniform coat that moved with it. I sat there on my bike completely frozen. I wasn't breathing, I wasn't blinking, I was just staring. It didn't seem to notice me, or if it did, it wasn't concerned. It just kept walking with that same steady, purposeful gait through the trees. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, it reached this large birch tree, the only one in that area, and stopped. It seemed to be looking at something on the ground, though I couldn't see what from my angle. Its back was partially to me, and I could see the massive breadth of its shoulders and how the muscles moved under that sand-colored coat. That's when my brain finally kicked back into gear, and I started weighing my options. I was halfway between Jake's house and mine. Going forward meant pedaling uphill, which would be slower, but would get me home. Going back meant a faster downhill ride to Jake's. Either way, I'd have to move, and movement might attract attention. I glanced down at my bike for just a second, trying to decide what to do. When I looked back up, maybe 3 seconds later, it was gone, completely vanished. The birch tree wasn't big enough to hide something that size completely, but I couldn't see it anywhere. It was like it had just disappeared into thin air. That was all the motivation I needed. I didn't even think about it. I dropped my bike right there on the side of the road and ran. I didn't run toward home either. I ran back toward Jake's house, downhill, as fast as my legs would carry me. I'm not ashamed to admit I was crying by the time I got there, partly from fear and partly from the physical exertion of sprinting nearly a mile. I burst through Jake's front door without knocking, which I'd never done before. His mum was in the kitchen and looked startled when I came crashing in, out of breath and probably white as a sheet. Jake was still in the living room and jumped up when he saw me. "Dude, what happened?" he asked, and I just stood there gasping for air. When I finally caught my breath enough to speak, I told them what I'd seen. I probably sounded completely insane, rambling about a giant sand-colored creature in the woods. Jake's mom called my parents right away. My dad came to pick me up about 30 minutes later. He could tell I was genuinely freaked out, which was unusual for me. I'm not the type to get scared easily. On the drive back, we stopped to get my bike, which was still lying where I'd dropped it. I was terrified to get out of the truck, but my dad went and got it, loaded it in the back, and we drove home. Dad didn't dismiss what I'd seen outright, which I appreciated. He's always been the type to listen first and judge later. He asked me questions about size, color, movement, specific details that made me feel like he was taking me seriously. He told me there had been other sightings in the area over the years, though he'd never seen anything himself. When we got home, Mom was worried but tried to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was someone in a ghillie suit, a bear standing on its hind legs, the light playing tricks. I listened to all the possibilities, but none of them matched what I'd seen. The movement alone eliminated most explanations. No human moves like that, suit or not. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, analyzing every detail, wondering if there was something I'd missed or misinterpreted. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became of what I'd seen. The next day, Dad and I drove back to the spot, and he let me show him exactly where I'd been and where the creature was. We walked into the woods a bit, looking for tracks or broken branches, but found nothing conclusive. The ground was too dry and rocky to hold good prints anyway. I've only told a few close friends about this since then. Most react with fascination or skepticism, which is fair. I would have been skeptical too before that day. Jake believes me because he saw how terrified I was when I got back to his house. That wasn't something I could have faked. One thing's for sure, I haven't ridden my bike on that stretch of road since. I make my parents drive me to Jake's house now, or we take the longer route that follows the main highway before cutting in. Sometimes when we drive past that spot, I get this cold feeling in my stomach, and I can't help but scan the tree line, half expecting to see that sandstone figure moving through the woods. I've spent hours researching Bigfoot sightings since then, particularly in Wyoming and Montana. There are more reports than people realize, many from credible sources: hunters, forest rangers, people who know the outdoors. A lot of the descriptions match what I saw, especially the fluid motion and imposing size. The coloration seems to vary by region, which makes sense from a camouflage perspective. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. Part of me hopes I don't, but another part wishes I had proof. A photo or video that could validate what I experienced. All I know is that my understanding of what exists in these woods has fundamentally changed. There are things out there that most people don't believe in because they've never seen them with their own eyes. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just putting my experience out there because keeping it bottled up has been driving me crazy. Whatever I saw that day was real. It was intelligent, and it was definitely not something that's supposed to exist according to science. Sometimes I wonder if it saw me too and just didn't care, or maybe it's been watching us all along, staying just out of sight, moving through the woods with that smooth, powerful stride that still haunts my dreams. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for almost 20 years now. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to get this off my chest because it still haunts me, and maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. Back in 2004, I was a junior biology student at the State University, living with my parents in Pinewood Valley to save money while finishing my degree. Our house sat right at the edge of some pretty dense woods, the kind where the tree canopy is so thick that it's hard to see more than 50 feet in any direction once you're inside. Around early September that year, I started noticing these weird sounds coming from the woods in the evenings. At first, I thought it was just coyotes, but these were different, deep, drawn-out howls that seemed to echo forever. They didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before, and I've spent my whole life in these woods. These vocalizations would sometimes go on for 10 or 15 minutes, then stop abruptly, only to start again from a completely different direction. My dad brushed it off as just some weird animal, but something about those sounds made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I started recording them on my old tape recorder, thinking I might be able to identify the animal later. I even played them for one of my biology professors, who looked genuinely puzzled and suggested it might be someone playing a prank. By mid-October, my curiosity had gotten the better of me. A couple of my buddies from the biology department, Chris and Mike, came over for the weekend, and I convinced them to camp out in the yard with me. Our driveway extended about 100 yards from the house and ended right at the edge of the woods, so we set up the tent there, thinking we'd be close enough to the house for safety, but near enough to the woods to maybe hear or see whatever was making those sounds. We grilled some burgers, drank a few beers, and eventually crashed around midnight. I remember checking my watch at 1:45 a.m. because I'd been tossing and turning, unable to shake this weird feeling of being watched. It was a clear night with a nearly full moon, so it wasn't completely dark outside. Chris and Mike were both out cold, snoring away. At almost exactly 2 a.m., I heard it, a deep, guttural grunting followed by the sound of branches breaking, not just twigs, but thick branches that made loud cracking sounds when they snapped. I froze in my sleeping bag, barely breathing, and listened. The grunting got louder, closer. I nudged Chris, who just mumbled something and rolled over. The sounds were coming from maybe 60 feet into the woods now. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as possible and crawled to the tent window. What I saw will stay with me forever. There was this massive, dark figure hunched over something on the ground. It was partially hidden by trees, but I could see it was beating something against the forest floor. Every few seconds, it would lift whatever it was holding and slam it down with incredible force. Then it paused and turned slightly, and I saw its eyes catch the moonlight. They reflected a dull, reddish color, like how a deer's eyes shine in headlights, but redder. I was too terrified to move or make a sound. The thing was huge, far bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, and it moved with this strange mix of power and precision. After a few minutes, it dragged whatever it had been beating deeper into the woods, up toward this rocky outcrop about 100 yards in. I could see its silhouette against the night sky as it crested the hill. That's when I got my first real look at it. It had to be at least 10 feet tall, with shoulders twice as broad as a large man. It was covered in what looked like dark brown or black hair, long and matted in places. It moved upright, but with a slight hunch, almost ape-like. The way it walked was fluid, not stiff like a person in a costume would move. I watched, paralyzed, as it reached the outcrop and started eating. There's no other word for it. It was tearing into whatever it had dragged up there, occasionally making these wet, smacking sounds that carried through the still night air. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, it suddenly stopped and raised its head, looking in our direction. I ducked down instantly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could hear it. When I finally gathered the courage to peek out again, it was moving down the hill toward our tent. The smell hit me first. It was this overpowering, musky odor, like a wet animal mixed with rotting vegetation and something else I can't describe. It made my eyes water and my stomach turn. I could hear its breathing now, heavy and rhythmic as it approached. We had hung a small camping kit from a tree branch near the tent, including a frying pan. As the creature got closer, it must have bumped into this, because suddenly there was a loud metallic clang as the pan hit the ground. The creature let out this deep, startled grunt and took off running back into the woods. The ground literally shook with each footfall. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening for any sounds of its return. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I woke Chris and Mike and told them we needed to check something out. They thought I was crazy. They hadn't heard anything all night, but they followed me into the woods anyway, where I'd seen the creature beating something on the ground. We found a disturbing scene. There were deer remains, tufts of fur, blood, and what looked like broken bone fragments scattered across a 6-foot area. The ground was torn up, like something had been thrashing around. Most disturbingly, the deer's skull was completely crushed, with pieces of bone driven into the soil. Several internal organs were missing, as if they'd been carefully removed. When we hiked up to the rocky outcrop, the main carcass was gone, but we found more fur, intestines, and large, unidentifiable tracks in the soft soil. The tracks were huge, at least 16 inches long and incredibly deep, like whatever made them weighed several hundred pounds. They weren't bear tracks. I've seen plenty of those. These were more humanoid, but massive, and with what looked like opposable thumbs. Most unsettling of all was what we found about 20 yards past the outcrop. Several pine trees, some 8 inches in diameter, had been bent and twisted together to form what looked like a crude shelter. The trees hadn't been cut. They'd been physically bent and broken at heights of 7 to 8 feet off the ground. No human could have done that without heavy equipment, and there were no tool marks anywhere. The whole area reeked of that same musky odor I'd smelled during the night. Chris and Mike finally started taking me seriously when they saw and smelled all this. We took some photos with my disposable camera and collected a few hair samples that were caught on the broken trees. I still have those photos somewhere, though they didn't capture much detail in the poor light. After that night, things escalated. Over the next 2 weeks, I experienced at least 5 more incidents. Twice, while walking near the woods in the evening, rocks were thrown in my direction from deep in the forest. Not just pebbles, baseball-sized rocks that could have seriously injured me if they'd connected. I heard those same vocalizations almost nightly now, sometimes from multiple directions at once, like they were communicating with each other. The most terrifying incident happened about a week after the camping night. I was taking out the trash at dusk when I heard a branch snap about 30 feet inside the tree line. I stupidly shined my flashlight toward the sound, and what happened next nearly stopped my heart. Something massive charged from the woods toward me, covering almost 20 feet in what felt like a split second. It stopped just inside the tree line, just out of the direct light, but I could see its massive outline and those same reddish eye reflections. It let out this deep, guttural sound that was halfway between a growl and a scream, and I dropped the flashlight and ran back to the house faster than I've ever moved in my life. A similar charge happened 3 days later when I was getting into my car early in the morning. This time, I saw it more clearly as it moved in the dawn light, an enormous, hair-covered figure with long arms and a cone-shaped head. It stopped at the edge of the driveway and beat its chest with both fists, making this hollow, thumping sound that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. I started noticing patterns in their behavior. They seemed to dislike direct light, especially flashlights. They were most active at dawn and dusk and during nights with good moonlight. And they weren't alone. I'm convinced there were at least 3 distinct individuals based on the vocalizations coming from different directions simultaneously. I tried telling local authorities, but they dismissed it as either bears or my imagination. One conservation officer actually laughed in my face. My parents were concerned but skeptical, suggesting it might be stress from school. Looking back, I think I know why they appeared when they did. About 5 miles away, a major construction project had just started, clearing several hundred acres of forest for a new subdivision. Around the same time, logging operations had begun in another nearby wooded area. The national forest that starts about 7 miles from our property encompasses nearly 20,000 acres. Plenty of space for these creatures to live undetected normally, but the construction and logging might have pushed them closer to residential areas. The activity continued for about 2 months before gradually tapering off as winter approached. By December, the sightings and sounds had stopped completely. I've often wondered if they migrated deeper into the national forest or if they have seasonal patterns of movement. I never got conclusive proof, and those hair samples were unfortunately lost when our basement flooded the following spring. The photos didn't show much beyond broken trees and deer remains, but I know what I saw, what I heard, and what I smelled. I've spent thousands of hours in those woods throughout my life, and I know the difference between normal forest animals and whatever these were. I've since finished my biology degree and even got my master's, focusing on wildlife ecology. I've never publicly shared this story in academic circles for obvious reasons, but it has driven my interest in undocumented species and habitat disruption. I still go into forests for my research, but never alone, and never without feeling that prickle of fear on the back of my neck. To this day, whenever I hear a branch crack in the woods or catch an unusual scent on the wind, my mind immediately goes back to that night in Pinewood Valley and the 10-foot-tall creature that crushed a deer's skull with its bare hands and stared at me with those reddish reflecting eyes. Story 11. I've never told this story to many people. My husband knows, but we decided to keep it quiet all these years. The older I get, though, the less I care what people think of me. I need to get this off my chest before I'm gone, because I know what I saw that day in March of 1977, and it wasn't anything that should exist in our Vermont woods. It was a Tuesday morning, cold but bright with that late winter sunshine that promises spring is coming but doesn't deliver any actual warmth. Harold had left for work at the lumber mill around 6:30, and I was alone in our farmhouse like I was most weekdays. We lived about 2 miles outside of Brookfield proper, which isn't much of a town to begin with, just a little place in Rutland County where everybody knows everybody's business. Our property backed up against a stretch of dense forest that ran all the way to the Green Mountains, The house sat on a small rise, with a clearing of about 50 yards between our backyard and where the woods began. Harold's father built the place in the 30s, and we'd been living there since we got married in '68. That morning, I was doing what I always did: laundry, dishes, sweeping the kitchen floor. Normal housewife things that filled my days. Around 10 in the morning, I was dusting the living room when I paused to adjust the cushions on the couch beneath our big picture window. That window was my favorite feature of the house, 6 feet wide with a perfect view of the backyard, the meadow, and the tree line beyond. As I straightened up, something at the edge of the woods caught my eye. At first, I thought it was Harold, which made no sense. He wouldn't be home for hours, and he had no reason to be skulking around the edge of our property. But it was tall like a person, standing upright. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing. Whatever it was stood partially obscured by a pine tree, just barely emerging from the forest. I remember feeling a strange tightness in my chest, like my body knew something was wrong before my mind could process it. Then it stepped fully into the clearing, and I stopped breathing. It was tall. Taller than Harold, who's 6 feet even, maybe 6.5 feet, but it was hard to tell at that distance. The thing was covered in dark, matted hair or fur, a muddy, brownish-black color that reminded me of the bears we sometimes got in our trash. But this was no bear. It stood on 2 legs like a man, but all wrong somehow. Its shoulders hunched forward unnaturally, like someone with terrible posture or carrying a heavy weight. The arms, God, those arms. They hung down almost to its knees, swinging slightly as it moved, too long, too loose, like they weren't properly attached to its body. I couldn't make out its face clearly from where I stood, thank the Lord, but I could see enough to know it had a flat, broad face covered in the same dark hair as the rest of its body. The head sat directly on its shoulders, with hardly any neck to speak of. For what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, the creature just stood there at the edge of our clearing, looking off toward the mountains. It seemed, I don't know, contemplative maybe, like it was taking in the view or listening for something. It didn't seem agitated or hunting. It was just standing there, existing, in a place where nothing like it should exist. I was frozen in place behind my picture window. I couldn't have moved if the house was on fire. My hands gripped the back of our plaid couch so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't dare move a muscle, afraid any slight motion might draw its attention. My breath fogged the glass slightly, and I realized I was holding it in short, shallow gasps. A part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real, that I was seeing things. Maybe it was just a bear standing funny, or a man in a costume, or I was having some kind of breakdown. But deep down, I knew better. This was something else entirely. After what seemed like an eternity, the creature turned slightly. For one horrible moment, I thought it was turning toward the house, toward me, and my heart nearly stopped, but instead it shifted its weight and began to move back toward the tree line. It didn't walk like a person. Its gait was odd, almost rolling from side to side, those impossibly long arms swinging with each step. In a few moments, it disappeared back into the woods, swallowed by the shadows and pine trees, as if it had never been there at all. I stayed frozen for I don't know how long after it vanished. When I finally managed to move, my legs nearly gave out. I stumbled to the kitchen phone, my hand hovering over the receiver. Who would I even call? The police? To tell them what? That I saw a monster in my backyard, that Bigfoot was real and he was in Brookfield, Vermont. They'd think I was crazy. Everyone would think I was crazy. I sat at our kitchen table instead, chain-smoking cigarettes and drinking cup after cup of coffee with shaking hands, watching the woods until Harold came home around 5. The whole time, I kept expecting the thing to return, maybe bring friends, maybe come closer to the house. But nothing happened. The woods remained still and ordinary for the rest of the day. When Harold walked through the door, one look at my face told him something was wrong. "Martha, what happened? Are you sick?" I burst into tears. which wasn't like me at all. I've always been the practical one, the steady one. Harold sat beside me, genuinely frightened now, and took my hands in his. "I saw something today," I finally managed to say between sobs. "Out in the yard, by the woods." "What, like a bear? Did it get into the trash again?" I shook my head. "No, it wasn't. It wasn't an animal. At least not any animal that's supposed to be here." I told him everything, trying to describe what I'd seen as clearly as I could. To his credit, Harold didn't laugh or tell me I was being hysterical. He listened, his face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Are you sure it wasn't a bear standing on its hind legs? They can look almost human sometimes when they do that." "Harold, I know what a bear looks like," I said. "This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person either. It was something else." He nodded slowly. "Okay, let me get my rifle and we'll go take a look." "No!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't go out there. It's getting dark. If it's still out there." He hesitated, then nodded again. "All right. First thing tomorrow, I'll check for tracks or signs. If there was something that big walking around, it must have left some evidence." That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep a wink. Every creak of the old farmhouse, every whisper of wind through the trees outside our window made me jump. I kept imagining that thing standing right outside, those long arms reaching for our doors and windows, trying to get in. Harold held me all night, his hunting rifle propped against the nightstand. Even he was spooked, though he tried not to show it. The next morning, as soon as it was light, Harold went out to check the edge of the woods where I'd seen the creature. I watched nervously from the porch, ready to scream if anything emerged from the trees. After about 20 minutes, he came back looking puzzled. "There are tracks," he said slowly, "but they're odd." "What do you mean, odd?" "They're big, bigger than any boot print I've ever seen, and not shaped quite right for a human foot, but they're definitely bipedal, walking on two legs." He ran a hand through his hair. "The stride length is huge too. Whatever made them was taking steps twice as long as mine." "Do you believe me now?" I asked quietly. He nodded, looking troubled. "I believe you saw something, Martha. I just don't know what it was." We debated telling someone, the sheriff maybe, or the game warden. But in the end, we decided against it. Brookfield was a small town, and news traveled fast. We'd be the crazy Hendersons, seeing monsters in the woods. People would laugh behind our backs. Our friends would stop inviting us over. It just wasn't worth it, so we kept it to ourselves. Harold started coming home for lunch when he could, and he never went hunting alone after that. He installed better locks on all our doors and windows, and we got a big dog from the shelter, a German Shepherd mix named Rex, who barked at everything. For weeks afterward, I couldn't look out that picture window without feeling a chill run down my spine. I'd catch myself scanning the tree line constantly, watching for any sign of movement. Sometimes at night I thought I heard strange sounds coming from the direction of the forest. Not quite animal, not quite human. Harold said it was just owls or coyotes, but I knew better. The thing that bothers me most, even now, 46 years later, is the casualness of it all. That creature wasn't hunting or threatening. It wasn't putting on a show. It was just being, like it belonged there, like those woods were its home as much as ours. It makes me wonder how long it had been there, how many times it might have watched our house while we were unaware. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years. Some stories sound like tall tales, but others, the ones with details about the way it moves, those long arms, that strange posture, those send ice through my veins because I know they're real. Those people saw what I saw. Harold passed away 3 years ago, and I've moved to a senior living apartment in Rutland. I don't miss that house, to be honest. I never felt quite safe there again after what I saw. Some nights I still dream about it. That dark figure at the edge of the woods, those impossibly long arms, that shuffling gait as it disappeared back into the trees. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's still out there in the Vermont woods. But I know what I saw that day in March of '77 wasn't something that should exist in our world. And the thought that keeps me up some nights is this: if that creature is real, what else might be out there, just beyond the edges of our everyday world, occasionally stepping into view when we least expect it? Story 12. I've debated for years whether to share this. People will probably think I'm making it up, or that I was just a scared kid with an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw that day at the creek, and it still makes my heart race when I think about it. This happened back when I was 12, living in a neighborhood that backed up to several acres of woods. Like most kids in the area, we spent our summers exploring those woods, building forts, and cooling off at the local swimming hole. It was nothing fancy, just a wider, deeper section of the creek where the neighborhood kids would gather when the temperature climbed. That particular day was sweltering. It was the kind of summer heat that makes the air feel like soup, where you can't move without sweating. My parents both worked, so I was stuck watching my little sister Kelly, who was 5 at the time. She'd been begging to go swimming all morning, following me around the house whining, "Jamie, please!" I finally gave in around noon, partly to shut her up and partly because I was melting too. The swimming hole wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute walk down a dirt path that wound behind our subdivision. I remember dressing Kelly in her pink bathing suit with the stupid cartoon character on it that she insisted on wearing every single day that summer. I packed us some sandwiches and juice boxes in my backpack, along with towels and sunscreen. Mom always made me promise to reapply sunscreen on Kelly every hour. "She burns easily, just like your father," she'd remind me. When we arrived, a few of the neighborhood boys were already there. Mike and Danny Cooper, the twins from 2 streets over, and Ethan Miller, who lived at the end of our street. They were 13 or 14 and were taking turns swinging from a rope someone had tied to an overhanging oak branch years ago. They'd swing out as far as possible before dropping into the deepest part of the swimming hole. Kelly immediately wanted to join them, but I kept her in the shallower part where the water only came up to her knees. She splashed around, looking for tadpoles and the tiny minnows that darted between your feet if you stood still long enough. I sat on a smooth rock at the water's edge, my feet dangling in the cool water, keeping one eye on Kelly while occasionally glancing at my dog-eared paperback. It was perfectly normal, perfectly safe. The kind of lazy summer day you take for granted when you're a kid. I'm not sure what made me look up. Maybe it was some subtle shift in the atmosphere, or perhaps it was just that eerie feeling of being watched. But when I raised my head and looked across the creek to the other side, where the woods grew thicker and darker, I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of light filtering through the leaves. But then it moved. Between 2 tall pines, partially hidden by underbrush, stood something I still struggled to describe. It was tall, way taller than any man I'd ever seen, 7 feet at least, maybe more, and wide across the shoulders, with dark brown hair covering its body. Not fur exactly, more like long matted hair, but it was the face that made my blood run cold, wide and flat, with a pronounced brow ridge and deep-set eyes that looked intelligent, not animal eyes. They were aware, calculating, and they were fixed directly on me. Its massive hands, I remember thinking they looked like hairy baseball gloves, were gripping a young tree, fingers wrapping completely around the trunk. The knuckles were dirty, the fingers ending in thick yellowed nails. When it opened its mouth slightly, I could see yellow, blocky teeth. Not the sharp canines of a predator, but not human teeth either. Something in between. For what felt like forever, we just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, so it just froze everything. Then it made a sound. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the air around us. The noise snapped me out of my paralysis, and I instinctively looked over at Kelly, who was obliviously splashing in the shallows with her back to the creature. When I looked back, the thing had shifted position. It was now in a half-crouch, its massive arms hanging forward. It looked ready to charge, to cross the 20 feet of creek that separated us, and its eyes, they held such focused intensity. It wasn't just looking at me anymore. It was looking at all of us, at the boys, at Kelly. "Kelly!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "We need to go now!" She started to protest, but something in my face must have scared her because she immediately waded toward me. I grabbed her arm, maybe too roughly, and yanked her out of the water. "What's wrong?" Mike called from the deeper part of the creek. I couldn't even form words. I just pointed across the water and started backing away, dragging Kelly with me. The boys turned to look, and I'll never forget the way their faces changed, from confusion to disbelief to pure terror in the span of seconds. "Holy shit!" Danny shouted, scrambling out of the water. The thing across the creek responded to his voice with a roar that was nothing like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, nothing from this world. It was deep and powerful enough to make my chest vibrate, but with this higher-pitched quality that made the hair on my neck stand up, like it was trying to mimic a human scream, but couldn't quite manage it. And then it moved. It burst from the underbrush with shocking speed, snapping branches and sending birds scattering from nearby trees. It hit the creek in 2 massive strides, water exploding around its legs. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed Kelly, hoisting her onto my hip despite her being almost too big for me to carry, and ran for the path that led back to our neighborhood. The boys were right behind us, their feet pounding the dirt. I could hear them gasping and cursing as we fled. The path was narrow and winding, lined with trees on both sides. Roots and rocks threatened to trip us with every step. Kelly was sobbing against my shoulder, but I couldn't stop to comfort her. My lungs were burning, my legs trembling, but pure terror kept me moving. Behind us came the sounds of pursuit, branches breaking, underbrush being crushed, and that horrible rumbling growl. It was following us, hunting us. "It's gaining!" Ethan screamed from somewhere behind me. I didn't dare look back. I just tightened my grip on Kelly and pushed myself harder. The path curved sharply to the right, and as we rounded the bend, I caught a glimpse of the creature through the trees. It was moving parallel to the path, crashing through the woods rather than following the trail. It was cutting the corner to intercept us. My heart nearly stopped. It was smart. It was herding us. Just as I thought we were done for, the trees began to thin, and I could see the backs of houses from our neighborhood. The creature must have seen them too, because it let out another one of those roars, this one sounding almost frustrated. And I heard the direction of its movement change. We burst out of the woods into someone's backyard, all of us gasping for air. Kelly was hysterical by this point, and the boys looked shell-shocked. We stood there for a minute, bent over, trying to catch our breath. What was that thing?" Mike finally managed to ask. I shook my head. I didn't have words. "We need to tell someone," Danny said, his voice shaking. "But who would believe us? Who would take the word of a bunch of kids about some monster in the woods?" We walked home in a tight group, constantly looking over our shoulders. When we reached my house, I took Kelly inside and tried to calm her down. She was too young to fully comprehend what had happened, but she knew something terrifying had chased us. My parents came home around 6 and immediately noticed something was wrong. Kelly was unnaturally quiet, and I kept jumping at every sound outside the windows. "What happened?" my mom asked, her forehead creased with concern. I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, but then closed it again. Even at 12, I knew how it would sound, so instead, I lied. "We saw Old Man Walker at the creek," I said, inventing wildly. There were always rumors among the neighborhood kids about a hermit who supposedly lived deep in the swampy part of the woods. He was yelling and chasing us. My parents exchanged a look. "Did he try to hurt you?" my dad asked, his voice tight with anger. "No," I said quickly, regretting my lie. "He just scared us. We ran away." My dad called the police anyway. They sent an officer who took a cursory look around the swimming hole but found nothing unusual. The official report probably read something like, "Kids spooked by local eccentric." The case was closed before it was even opened, but I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a man, not even a wild, hermit-like man. The proportions were all wrong. The sounds it made were wrong. The way it moved was wrong. Everything about it was just wrong. For the rest of that summer, I refused to go back to the swimming hole. If Kelly wanted to swim, I'd take her to the community pool where there were other people and no trees for something to hide behind. I kept her close, always within arm's reach. The boys stopped going to the creek too. None of us ever discussed what happened that day again, as if talking about it might somehow summon the creature back. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, moved away. But I never forgot. Sometimes I'd see documentaries or read articles about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and the descriptions would match so perfectly with what I saw that day that my stomach would knot up. The height, the build, the face, it was all the same. I returned to my hometown a few years ago to help my parents move. Out of some morbid curiosity, or perhaps seeking closure, I walked the old path to the swimming hole. It looked smaller than I remembered, less magical. The rope swing was gone, the bank eroded in places. As I stood there, memories flooding back, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking when I'd be back. I turned to leave, but stopped when I felt that same sensation from years ago, that unmistakable feeling of being watched. Across the creek, the woods were silent. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just heavy, waiting silence. I didn't stay to investigate. I walked, then ran, back up that path, my heart hammering just like it had when I was 12. I'm 32 now, and I still ran like a scared child. I don't know what I saw that day when I was 12. I can't explain it. Science says creatures like that don't exist. But science hasn't stood on the edge of that creek and locked eyes with something that shouldn't be there. I have, and sometimes, in my dreams, I'm still running from it. Story 13. I've been sitting on this experience for nearly 20 years now. My friends and I made a pact not to talk about it because we knew nobody would believe us, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. What happened that night in the Bighorns changed me forever. It was June of 2004. I was 26 then, working construction in Sheridan, Wyoming. My buddies Tyler and Jay had been planning this camping trip for weeks. Tyler was this burly guy who'd grown up hunting in these mountains his whole life. Jay was quieter, more methodical, the type who researched everything before doing it. Me, I'm Jason. I just wanted to get away from the summer heat and drink some beers in the woods. We loaded up Tyler's F-150 early that Saturday morning. The bed was packed with our tent, sleeping bags, coolers, and Tyler's shotgun. I brought my .38 Special, not because I expected trouble, but because that's just what you did in Wyoming backcountry. Jay had his dad's old .30-06 rifle. The drive started on paved roads, but we eventually turned onto this narrow Forest Service road that twisted up into the mountains. I remember checking the odometer as we bounced along, 12 miles from the last bit of pavement. 12 miles doesn't sound like much until you're crawling along at 15 miles per hour on a rutted dirt road with drop-offs that would send you tumbling hundreds of feet. We found this perfect clearing surrounded by these massive pines and spruce trees, the kind of spot where you could tell not many people ventured. Tyler backed the truck to the edge of the clearing, and we set up camp with the mountains rising behind us to the north and thick forest everywhere else. The day passed normally. We hiked a bit, fished in a small stream about a quarter-mile east of our camp, and got a decent fire going as the sun went down. We were drinking, telling stories, just being guys away from civilization. I remember checking my watch around 11:30 and thinking about turning in soon. That's when everything changed. Around midnight, this sound cut through the night. I've tried to describe it for years, but words don't do it justice. It was a howl, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. Deep, resonant, and it had this weird two-tone quality, like two notes being played at once. It came from the hill to the north of us, maybe a couple hundred yards away. What the hell was that? I remember asking. Tyler was already on his feet, staring into the darkness. "Not an elk, not a bear," he said quietly. Then it happened again. The same howl, but this time it was answered by another one from further away, to the west of us. Then a third, fainter, from the south. The hairs on my neck stood up. Jay whispered, "They're surrounding us." I want to be clear. We weren't drunk. We'd had a few beers each, but that sound instantly sobered us up. Tyler went to the truck and grabbed his shotgun without saying a word. I followed and got my .38. Jay already had his rifle propped against a log near the fire. We stood there listening. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no nightbirds, nothing. Just the crackling of our fire and our own breathing. "Let's pack up," Jay suggested. "We can drive down tonight." Before we could move, I caught movement at the northern edge of our clearing. Something massive shifted between two trees. When I say massive, I don't mean bear-sized. I mean it blocked out the stars between the trees. It was tall, 7, maybe 8 feet, and it was watching us. I raised my pistol instinctively, but Tyler put his hand on my arm. "Don't," he whispered. Don't provoke it." The figure stayed there for maybe 30 seconds, completely still. Then it simply stepped back and disappeared into the darkness. I've never felt more exposed than I did at that moment, standing in the light of our campfire while unknown eyes watched from the darkness. Then the howling started again, this time from the south, maybe half a mile away. The sound echoed through the mountains, and then it was answered by whatever had been watching us from the north. "They're communicating," Jay said, his voice shaking. "They're coordinating." That's when I spotted the second one, east of camp, where we'd been fishing earlier. This one was moving, stepping from tree to tree, working its way closer. It was even bigger than the first, taller, bulkier. The way it moved was wrong. Too fluid for something that size, too quiet. I could just make out its silhouette when it paused between trees. Broad shoulders, no neck, arms that hung too low. "Guys," I whispered, nodding in its direction. Tyler saw it too. He raised his shotgun slightly, not aiming, just ready. "Start packing. Now." No sudden movements. We began gathering our stuff as quietly as possible. The fire was still going, casting our shadows long across the clearing. I kept glancing at that eastern tree line, watching the figure as it watched us. It never came into the clearing, just kept pacing along the edge, stopping occasionally to stand completely still. Then I realized the horrifying truth. There were 3 of them. The one to the north that had howled first, the one to the east that was stalking along the tree line, and a third one somewhere to the south that had answered the calls. They had positioned themselves around us, 3 points of a triangle, hunting us. I've been deer hunting my whole life. I know what it looks like when predators coordinate to trap prey. That's exactly what was happening to us. We abandoned half our gear, just grabbed the essentials and threw them in the truck. The whole time, I kept my eyes on that eastern figure. It knew what we were doing. It was waiting, watching our every move. The third howl came again, closer now. The southern one was moving in. Tyler got the truck started, and Jay and I jumped in. As we pulled away, headlights sweeping across the trees, I caught a full glimpse of the eastern figure as it stepped partially out from behind a massive spruce. I'll never forget what I saw. Not a bear standing on hind legs, not a man in a suit. This thing was solid muscle covered in dark hair, with a sloped head that sat directly on its shoulders. No neck, and its eyes caught the headlights for just a second, reflective, like a cat's. We tore down that Forest Service road, bouncing so hard I smashed my head against the roof of the cab. Nobody spoke, we just wanted distance. About halfway down the mountain, Tyler finally broke the silence. "Sasquatch. Had to be." 3 of them, Jay added, his voice barely audible over the engine, working together. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew what I'd seen. What else could it have been? We reached a small cluster of houses near the bottom of the mountain, about 2 miles from the paved road. There was a single house with lights still on. As we approached, their dogs started going crazy, 3 or 4 of them barking frantically at something behind us. Tyler slowed the truck, and we heard it again. That same two-tone howl coming from up the road we'd just traveled down. They'd followed us. "Go, go!" I shouted, and Tyler floored it. We didn't stop until we hit the highway, and we drove straight back to Sheridan without stopping once. We sat in Tyler's driveway until dawn, too wired to sleep, trying to make sense of what had happened. We agreed not to tell anyone. Who would believe us? 3 grown men claiming they were hunted by a family of Bigfoot. But the story doesn't end there. A month later, Jay went back. I thought he was crazy, but he went in daylight with 2 other friends who had guns. He said he needed to know if there was any evidence, anything to prove we hadn't imagined it all. They found our campsite easily enough. The fire ring was still there, our abandoned gear scattered around. But what Jay described when he got back chilled me to the bone. Around the clearing, precisely where we'd seen the figures standing, were worn patches in the earth, especially near our fire ring. Patches where the ground had been compressed by something very heavy, standing in one spot for a long time, watching us. They also found tracks, not clear footprints, but depressions in the forest floor. Big ones, spaced far apart, like something with a massive stride had been walking there. That was 20 years ago, and I've never gone back to the Bighorns. Tyler moved to Arizona the following year. Jay still lives in Wyoming, but he doesn't camp anymore. Not after what happened. I've spent countless nights trying to rationalize what we experienced. Could it have been other campers messing with us? No way. We were 12 miles from pavement on an unmarked Forest Service road. Could it have been bears? Not a chance. Bears don't coordinate like that. They don't howl. They don't stand in the shadows watching you pack. What haunts me most isn't just what we saw. It's the intelligence behind it. These creatures weren't just animals reacting to us being in their territory. They were strategizing, communicating, hunting us methodically. I still wake up sometimes hearing those howls, that two-tone sound that doesn't belong to any known animal, and I wonder how many other people have experienced something similar, but, like us, were too afraid of ridicule to ever tell their story. I'm only writing this now because I need someone to know what happened out there. Those mountains harbor something that science refuses to acknowledge. Something that watches and waits and knows exactly how to hunt humans who venture too deep into its territory. And the most terrifying part? They let us go. They could have taken us at any point, but they escorted us out instead, like they were sending a message. This is our land. Remember that. Story 14. I've never really told this story to many people. Most who've heard it think I'm making it up, or that I was just a scared kid with an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw, and 29 years later, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This happened back in August of 1994. I was 12 years old, living with my mom and stepdad in a trailer park just outside Bradford, Pennsylvania. The park wasn't anything fancy, just a bunch of single wides arranged in rows with small yards between them. Our trailer sat at the edge of the park with nothing behind us except dense woods that stretched for miles. That particular night, my mom and stepdad had gone out to dinner with some friends, leaving me home alone. It wasn't a big deal. I was 12, considered mature for my age, and we had our dog Max, a lab mix, who was the sweetest, most laid-back dog you could imagine. I remember it was a Friday night because I was excited to stay up late watching scary movies on cable. It was around 8:30 in the evening. The sun had just set, and it was that weird twilight time where it's not completely dark yet. I was sprawled out on our worn-out couch in the living room, watching some cheesy horror movie. I think it might have been one of those Children of the Corn sequels. Max was lying on the floor near my feet, occasionally looking up when something on the TV caught his attention. It was hot that night, that sticky, humid Pennsylvania summer heat that makes everything feel damp. We didn't have air conditioning in the trailer, so I had all the windows open, hoping to catch any hint of a breeze. The only light on in the house was the small lamp next to the couch and the glow from the TV. Outside, we had 2 lights, one by the front door and one by the back door, those yellow bug lights that don't attract mosquitoes as much. I remember everything about that night so clearly. I was wearing my favorite Batman t-shirt and basketball shorts. I had a bowl of microwave popcorn balanced on my stomach and a can of Sprite on the coffee table. It was just a normal night, nothing special, until Max changed. I still remember the exact moment it happened. There was this stupid jump scare in the movie, and I laughed because it was so predictable. That's when I noticed Max wasn't lying down anymore. He was standing rigid, staring at the back door of the trailer, the fur along his spine standing straight up. "What's up, buddy?" I asked, sitting up and spilling some popcorn. He didn't even acknowledge me. His ears were perked forward, completely focused on the back door. Then he started this low growl. Not the playful growl he'd do when we were roughhousing, but something deep and primal that I'd never heard from him before. I muted the TV, and that's when I noticed the silence. Usually our trailer park had background noise, neighbors' TVs, people talking outside, cars passing, but there was nothing. Even the constant summer cricket chirping had stopped. It was like someone had hit a universal mute button on the world outside our thin trailer walls. "Max?" I whispered, suddenly afraid to speak too loudly. He backed up toward me, still growling, never taking his eyes off the back door. As he moved closer, I could feel him trembling. Max was a solid 60-pound dog, and I'd never seen him afraid of anything. Not thunderstorms, not the vacuum cleaner, nothing. That's when I saw it. The back door of our trailer had a window in the top half. Just a standard rectangular pane of glass, maybe 2 feet tall by 1.5 feet wide. The outdoor light was mounted right above it, casting a yellowish glow, and suddenly that window went dark. Not partially blocked, not shadowed, completely dark, as if someone had placed a solid black sheet over the entire thing. Something was standing outside our door, something big enough to block the entire window. I froze. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Max backed up until he was pressed against the couch, his growl turning into a whimper. His tail was tucked between his legs. The shadow stayed there, completely still, for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. I kept thinking it would move away, that it was just someone from the trailer park coming to check on me. But deep down, I knew better. No one from our park was that big. Then the shadow moved. Not away from the door, but along the side of the trailer. I could hear the faintest sound, like something brushing against the aluminum siding of our home. It wasn't quick. It was deliberate, like whatever it was didn't care if I heard it. Max and I both turned our heads, following the sound as it moved around the perimeter of the trailer. When it reached the living room window, the one right next to where I was sitting, Max stopped growling completely and just whimpered, pressing himself harder against the couch. The window in our living room was bigger than the one in the door, maybe 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. I was staring right at it when the shadow appeared. It blocked the entire window, just like it had with the back door. But from this angle, with the front porch light behind it, I could make out a silhouette. And God, I wish I couldn't. I saw what looked like a massive head, not round like a human's, but slightly pointed at the top, broad shoulders that seemed to extend beyond the frame of the window, and arms, long arms that hung down at its sides. It wasn't moving, it was just standing there, watching. That's when the smell hit me. Our windows were open, remember? It was like wet earth after a heavy rain, mixed with something musky and sour, almost like a skunk, but not quite. It was overpowering, making my eyes water and my stomach turn. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even blink. I was completely paralyzed with fear, just staring at this massive shadow that was staring back at me through my window. The scariest part was how still it was. It didn't fidget or shift weight like a person would. It just stood there, perfectly motionless, for what must have been at least 30 seconds. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it moved away from the window. I heard the same brushing sound against the siding, moving away toward the back of the trailer, toward the woods. As soon as the shadow was gone, Max jumped up onto the couch and pressed himself against me, still trembling and whimpering. I wrapped my arms around him, partly to comfort him and partly because I was terrified out of my mind. I should have called someone. I should have called the police or a neighbor. But I couldn't make myself move from that couch. I was convinced that if I got up, if I made any noise at all, that thing would come back. So I sat there, clutching Max, staring at the muted TV, but not seeing anything on the screen. I don't know how long we sat like that. It felt like hours. I remember looking at the clock at some point and seeing it was almost 10, which meant I'd been frozen in place for over an hour. When I finally heard my mom and stepdad's car pulling into our driveway, I burst into tears. All the fear I'd been holding in just exploded out of me. Max started barking and running to the door, acting like his normal self again. My mum rushed in first and found me sobbing on the couch. "Ethan, what happened? Are you hurt?" I tried to explain through my tears, pointing at the windows and the back door, telling them about the shadow and the smell. My stepdad, Mike, immediately went outside with a flashlight to check around the trailer while my mum stayed with me. Mike came back in after a few minutes. "There's nothing out there, bud. No footprints, nothing disturbed. You sure you weren't just spooked by that movie?" He nodded toward the TV, which was still playing the horror film I'd been watching. "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice shaky. "Something was looking in our windows, both of them. And Max saw it too. He was growling and everything." My mom sat next to me, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Honey, those windows are pretty high off the ground. For something to look in like that, it would have to be really tall." "It was," I said. "It was huge. It blocked the whole window." They didn't believe me. Not really. They checked all the locks, looked outside one more time, and chalked it up to my imagination getting the better of me while watching a scary movie alone. But I know what I saw, and more importantly, I know what Max saw and smelled. Dogs don't get scared of imaginary things. We moved away from that trailer park about 6 months later when Mike got a new job in Pittsburgh. I was relieved. I'd barely slept since that night, always feeling like something was watching me through my bedroom window. As I got older, I started researching, trying to make sense of what happened. I looked into local wildlife, thinking maybe it was a bear or something. But bears don't stand still like that. They don't have that silhouette, and they definitely don't move that silently. It wasn't until I was in college that I stumbled across some Bigfoot research online. The descriptions of height, the way they move, the smell people report, it all matched what I experienced that night. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I've spent almost 3 decades questioning my own memory, wondering if maybe I did just scare myself with that stupid movie. But then I remember Max, how a dog who wasn't afraid of anything was reduced to a trembling, whimpering mess, how he pressed himself against the couch like he was trying to disappear. Dogs don't lie. Dogs don't imagine things. Something was outside our trailer that night, something massive, something that wanted to look in and see us. I don't know if it was a Bigfoot or what, but it was real, and it was watching me. I'm 31 now, living in a suburban house in Ohio with my wife and daughter. We have a dog, a golden retriever named Daisy, who sleeps at the foot of our bed every night. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I find myself staring at our bedroom windows, half expecting to see that silhouette again. I still don't open windows at night, no matter how hot it gets. My wife thinks I'm just being energy conscious, keeping the AC in. I've never told her the real reason. How do you tell someone you're still afraid of something that looked through your window when you were 12, that you still wonder if it's out there somewhere, moving silently through the woods at night? I don't have any proof of what happened that August night in 1994, just my memories and the lingering fear that's never fully gone away. But I know what I saw, and sometimes when the house is quiet and dark, I swear I can still smell that strange mixture of wet earth and musk drifting through the air. Story 15. I've been hesitating to post this for weeks now, but I need to get it off my chest. I can't talk to my family about it. They'd think I've lost my mind. Maybe some of you have experienced something similar. This happened on November 5th, 2023, just a few months ago. I'd been planning an elk hunt in the Flat Tops Wilderness in Colorado for months. I'm an experienced hunter, been doing it for 15 years, but nothing in those years prepared me for what happened. I left my truck at the trailhead around 4:30 in the morning. It was still pitch black, with that bone-chilling cold that hits you before dawn in the mountains, the kind that makes your nose hairs freeze when you breathe. I remember checking my pack one last time by headlamp: rifle, ammo, coffee thermos, jerky, extra layers, first aid kit, the usual stuff. The snow was about 3 inches deep from a storm that had passed through a couple days earlier. The hike-in was peaceful, just me, my headlamp beam, and the sound of my boots crunching through the crusty top layer of snow. I always loved that feeling of being the only human for miles. At least, that's what I thought I was. I reached my planned hunting spot right as the sky started lightening. It was a perfect setup, a ridge overlooking a meadow with a small creek running through it. I'd scouted this area back in September, and knew elk used it regularly. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, I could see fresh tracks crossing the meadow below. As the sun finally crested the mountains, I settled in against a large pine, poured some coffee from my thermos, and glassed the area with my binoculars. Steam from my coffee cup curled up into the cold air as I scanned for movement. Everything looked perfect. Fresh snow, good visibility, plenty of sign. But something felt off. I can't really explain it, but there was this heaviness to the air, like that feeling right before a massive thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I kept looking over my shoulder for no reason. At first, I brushed it off as just being hyper-alert while hunting. After finishing my coffee around 7:30, I decided to slowly work my way along a game trail that followed the ridgeline. The snow made it easy to spot any fresh tracks crossing my path. I moved quietly, stopping every few dozen yards to glass the area below. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Alongside my own boot prints, where I'd just walked minutes before, were these massive footprints, and I mean massive. They looked almost human, but were easily twice the size of my size 11 boots. I could clearly see 5 toes pressed into the snow. The stride length was incredible, like each step covered almost twice what mine did. I froze, staring at these prints. They hadn't been there when I walked through. I'm absolutely certain of that. I would have noticed something so obvious in the fresh snow. Whatever made them had been walking right behind me, stepping almost in my tracks, but occasionally leaving its own distinct print. My first thought was bear, but these weren't bear tracks. I've seen plenty of those. These were clearly foot-shaped with defined toes. My second thought was other hunter, but unless Shaquille O'Neal was hunting barefoot in 20-degree weather, that wasn't it either. While I was still processing this, I heard it. Footfalls behind me, up the hill. Heavy steps that I could actually feel through my boots. When I moved, it moved. When I stopped, it stopped. Not immediately, but with just enough delay that I knew something was mimicking me. I'm not ashamed to admit my heart was racing. I had my rifle, but it was loaded with elk rounds, not whatever this was. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that panicking in the wilderness is always the wrong move. I slipped behind a fallen tree, trying to make it look casual, like I was just setting up another glassing spot. Then I slowly turned and peered uphill through my binoculars. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a boulder, was this figure. It was massive, probably 7 or 8 feet tall. Dark brown or black fur covered its body. It had these impossibly broad shoulders and thick, long arms. It was standing upright on 2 legs, watching me. This was no bear. Bears don't stand like that for extended periods. They don't watch you with that kind of intelligence. I lowered my binoculars with shaking hands. Even without them, I could still make out its silhouette. It wasn't trying very hard to hide, it was just observing me. I felt like a mouse being watched by a hawk. I made a decision then to keep walking along the ridge, but faster now, not running. Something deep inside told me running would be dangerous, but definitely picking up the pace. I heard it moving too, paralleling me from uphill, matching my increased speed. The footfalls were heavy enough that small chunks of snow were dislodging from tree branches as it passed. The worst part was knowing it could have easily caught up to me if it wanted to. Its stride length alone meant it was barely exerting itself to keep pace with my increasingly hurried walk. As I rounded a rock outcropping, the footsteps suddenly stopped. The woods felt empty, like whatever presence had been there had simply vanished. I've never felt such an immediate sense of relief. It was like someone had lifted a weight off my chest that I hadn't even realized was there. I stood there for a few minutes, catching my breath, listening. Nothing but the occasional bird call and the soft sound of snow falling from branches in the morning sun. Whatever had been following me was gone, or at least it wanted me to think it was gone. I continued along the ridge, constantly looking over my shoulder. The giant tracks continued beside mine for another 100 yards or so before veering off into a dense thicket of young pines. I absolutely was not going to follow them. When I reached the meadow again around 9:30, I felt another wave of relief wash over me. Open spaces felt safer somehow. I stayed there until around noon, but my heart wasn't in hunting anymore. I kept scanning the tree line where I'd had my encounter, barely even looking for elk. Before heading back to my truck, I went to examine those footprints again. They were still there, pressed deep into the snow. I put my boot next to one for scale, and it was ridiculous. My entire boot fit inside the forefoot. I wish I'd taken a picture, but honestly, in that moment, documentation was the last thing on my mind. I just wanted to get back to my vehicle. The hike out was the longest 3 miles of my life. I felt exposed the entire time, like eyes were watching me from every shadowy patch of forest. I made it back to my truck around 2 in the afternoon, threw my gear in the back, and just sat in the driver's seat for a while. I keep replaying it all in my head. Something followed me that day, something tall, heavy, and smart enough to stay just out of clear sight. Something that walked on 2 legs and left prints no known animal could make. I've been hunting all my life, and I've never believed in Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. I've always laughed at those stories. I'm not laughing anymore. I don't know what else it could have been. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows something happened because I came home early and was visibly shaken. But I just told her I'd had a weird feeling and decided to cut the trip short. How do you tell someone you're pretty sure you were stalked by a creature that's not supposed to exist? One thing's for sure, I'm never hunting alone in that area again. Not ever. If I go back at all, it'll be with at least 2 other people. There's something out there in the flat tops that doesn't want to be found, but for some reason, it wanted to find me that day. I still don't understand why it followed me like that, or why it suddenly left. Was it curious? Territorial? Just checking me out? I don't know, but those footprints beside mine in the fresh snow, I can't explain them, and I can't forget them. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just putting this out there because I need to tell someone who won't immediately think I'm crazy. Has anyone else experienced anything like this in Colorado or anywhere? I keep telling myself there must be a rational explanation, but I'm running out of options that make sense. Story 16. I still have trouble talking about what happened that night in 2002. It's been over 20 years, but I can still smell that musky odor when I think about it. I've never written this down before, but after seeing others share similar experiences, I figured it's time I got this off my chest. I was 17 back then, a junior on our high school football team in East Texas. We weren't state champions or anything, but we were tight, like brothers. After our final game that fall season, we had this tradition where the upperclassmen would go camping in Davy Crockett National Forest. It was supposed to be this bonding thing, you know, a way to blow off steam after months of practices and games. There were 6 of us that weekend. Me, Tim, Brandon, Marcus, Kyle, and Darius. Tim was my best friend since elementary school. We'd done everything together, including joining the football team. The others were teammates we hung out with regularly. Marcus's dad had dropped us off about 2 miles from the main road at this public shelter. It wasn't anything fancy, just a raised wooden platform with a roof and an open front facing a fire ring. But it was perfect for us because nobody wanted to mess with tents. We hiked in that Friday afternoon, carrying our sleeping bags, coolers with sandwiches and sodas. No beer. We were actually good kids despite what our coaches might have thought. And enough firewood to last the night. The shelter was pretty remote. We hadn't seen another soul since we'd left the main campground area. We spent that evening doing typical teenage boy stuff, talking about girls from school, rehashing plays from our season, and telling increasingly exaggerated ghost stories as the night got darker. Around 11, we laid out our sleeping bags in a row on the shelter's wooden floor, all facing the fire ring. I remember being in the middle, with Tim to my right and Brandon to my left. I fell asleep pretty quickly, tired from the hike and the week of school. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. I'm guessing around midnight or 1 in the morning, but something pulled me from a deep sleep. At first, I thought maybe I needed to pee, but then I realized what had actually woken me was a smell. Not just any smell, but this powerful, musky odor, unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It was like wet dog mixed with something rotting and something else I still can't describe. The stench was so strong it made my eyes water. I was lying on my back, and when I opened my eyes, I saw our fire was still going, though it had died down to mostly embers with occasional small flames. And then I saw it. A massive silhouette standing between our shelter and the fire. My blood turned to ice. This thing was huge. It had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe closer to 8. It was standing upright on 2 legs, but there was nothing human about it. Its entire body was covered in what looked like thick, matted hair or fur. What struck me most were its arms. They hung down almost to its knees, way longer than any person's would be. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, easily twice the width of our linebackers. I tried to scream. I tried to move. I couldn't do either. It was like my body had completely disconnected from my brain. I could think. I could breathe. But that was it. Complete paralysis. I've never felt terror like that before or since. Knowing something dangerous is right there, and you can't even move a finger to defend yourself. And then it got worse. The creature took a step forward, moving closer to our shelter. I could hear its breathing now, deep, heavy breaths that seemed too controlled to be an animal, but too powerful to be human. It was standing right at the edge of our shelter, not more than 4 feet from where Tim and I were lying in our sleeping bags. That's when it... God. This is still hard to write. It started urinating, not like discreetly or anything. It literally just stood there and pissed all over me and Tim. I could feel the hot liquid soaking through my sleeping bag, onto my clothes, my skin. The smell became 10 times worse. This wasn't just regular urine. It had that same musky animal stench, but concentrated and hot and real. I lay there, completely helpless, as this creature deliberately urinated on us. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't marking territory in some random spot. It specifically targeted us. It knew exactly what it was doing. When it finished, it just stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it turned. I remember seeing its silhouette shift against the glow from the fire and walked away. No breaking branches, no heavy footsteps. It just melted into the darkness beyond our campsite with an eerie silence that seemed impossible for something so large. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen in shock and fear. It could have been minutes or an hour. Eventually I felt control returning to my limbs. My fingers started to tingle, then my arms. Just as I was about to try sitting up, Tim suddenly jolted awake beside me. "What the fuck?" he shouted, thrashing around in his sleeping bag. "Who did this? Which one of you assholes pissed on me?" His shouting woke everyone else up. There was confusion, flashlights clicking on, everyone talking at once. Tim was furious, thinking one of the guys had played a disgusting prank on him. Seriously, who the hell did this? Tim was standing now, his sleeping bag dripping. This isn't funny. I was still trying to find my voice. When I finally managed to speak, it came out as a croak. It wasn't any of us, Tim. Everyone turned to look at me. I must have looked terrible because Brandon immediately asked if I was okay. I shook my head. There was something here, something big. What are you talking about? Marcus asked, grabbing his flashlight and scanning the area around the shelter. I tried to explain what I'd seen. As I spoke, I watched their faces change from skepticism to concern. They knew me well enough to know I wouldn't make something like this up. Dude, there's nothing out here, Kyle said, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. We're miles from anywhere. The ranger station is closed for the night. And we're the only ones at this campsite, Darius added, but he was looking nervously into the darkness. Tim was still angry, but now there was fear mixing with his anger. So you're saying some giant hairy thing just walked up and pissed on us? Why would anything do that? I didn't have an answer. None of us did. We spent the next 20 minutes debating what to do. The shelter was about 2 miles from where Marcus's dad had dropped us off, and we didn't have a cell phone with reception. This was 2002. Not everyone had phones yet, and those that did couldn't get signal out here in the woods. I can still smell it, Brandon said quietly, wrinkling his nose. He was right. That musky odor hung in the air, as strong as when the creature had been standing right there. That's when we noticed something else disturbing. Our coolers, which we'd left just outside the shelter, were untouched. If it had been a bear or some other animal looking for food, it would have gone for them first. Whatever had visited us wasn't interested in our food. I'm not staying here, Tim declared, grabbing his flashlight. I don't care if we have to walk back to the main road in the dark. None of us argued. We started packing up our stuff as quickly as possible. Tim's sleeping bag was soaked through, so he had to leave it behind. Mine was damp, but not completely ruined. We were so scared that we didn't even properly put out the fire, something our dads would have killed us for under normal circumstances. We left within minutes. 6 terrified teenagers stumbling through the dark woods with flashlights, jumping at every sound. The hike back to the road took us almost 3 hours because we kept stopping to listen, convinced we were being followed. That feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Several times we heard movement in the brush to our sides, but we never saw anything. We reached the main road around 4 in the morning and just sat there, huddled together at the trailhead, waiting for dawn. None of us wanted to admit how scared we were. We were football players, supposed to be tough. But what I'd seen that night was beyond anything human, beyond anything natural. When morning finally came, Marcus managed to get enough cell signal to call his dad. While we waited for him to drive out, Brandon convinced us we should go back to the shelter in daylight. His reasoning was that we needed to properly put out the fire and get Tim's sleeping bag. I think he also wanted proof that what happened was real. Only 4 of us went back. Me, Brandon, Marcus, and Kyle. Tim refused, and Darius stayed with him. The walk back seemed completely different in daylight. Birds were singing, sunlight filtered through the trees, and that sense of dread had lifted somewhat. When we reached the shelter, everything looked normal at first glance. The fire had burned itself out, thankfully not starting a forest fire. Tim's sleeping bag was still there, still wet and now reeking, but as we looked closer, we noticed something else. The ground around the shelter was disturbed. The dirt was too dry to hold clear footprints, but there were depressions and scattered leaves that suggested something large had stood exactly where I'd seen the creature. Kyle picked up Tim's sleeping bag using a stick. "This doesn't smell like human piss," he said, gagging slightly. "It's way stronger." We took the sleeping bag and headed back, none of us wanting to stay any longer than necessary. On the drive home, sitting in the back of Marcus's dad's SUV, we finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding. So, what do you think it was? Brandon asked quietly, making sure Marcus's dad couldn't hear us over the radio. I hesitated before answering. You guys are going to think I'm crazy. After last night, nothing sounds crazy, Kyle said. I think it was a Bigfoot. I expected laughter. Instead, there were nods. My uncle always talked about something like that living in these woods, Marcus whispered. I thought he was just trying to scare me. We made a pact not to tell anyone else. Who would believe us? We'd be the laughingstock of the school. But over the years, we've had private conversations about that night. All of us who were there know what happened wasn't normal. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person in a costume, and it certainly wasn't a dream. What I still can't figure out is why it did what it did. Was it marking territory, trying to scare us away? Or was it something more deliberate, some kind of message or warning? I've never gone camping since. I can't bring myself to sleep outdoors, knowing what might be watching from the darkness. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can smell that musky odor again. And in those moments, I'm right back there, paralyzed, helpless, watching a massive silhouette against the dying fire. Whatever visited us that night in Davy Crockett National Forest, it wasn't just passing through, it wanted us to know it was there. And 20 years later, I still feel like it's watching me. Story 17. I'm still shaking a bit as I write this. Even though it's been years, I get that same cold rush down my spine whenever I think about what happened that morning in December 2014. I've been reading other accounts here for a while, and I guess it's time I shared mine. I come from a family of hunters. My dad taught me to hunt when I was 12, and our family has this private hunting land near Chester, Massachusetts. Nothing fancy, just about 80 acres of typical New England forest, lots of oak, maple, some pine stands, and a few old logging roads cutting through it. We've hunted there for generations. By December 2014, I hadn't been hunting in about 5 years. Life got busy. Work, relationships, you know how it goes. I was 33 and feeling disconnected from something that used to be a big part of my identity. So when muzzleloader season came around that year, I decided to get back out there. The night before, I cleaned my old Thompson Center, packed my gear, and set my alarm for 4 in the morning. I remember feeling excited but nervous too, like I was trying to reconnect with a part of myself I'd lost. I arrived at our property around 4:45. It was that deep kind of dark you only get in rural areas, where you can't see your hand in front of your face without a light. The temperature was in the low 20s, cold enough that my breath made thick clouds in the beam of my headlamp. My plan was simple. Walk about half a mile in along this old logging road to a spot where the road makes a sharp bend. There's a little clearing there with good visibility of a deer trail. I'd hunted that spot dozens of times before. I parked my truck at our usual spot near the property entrance, grabbed my gear, and started walking in. The only sounds were my boots crunching on frozen leaves and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Normal stuff. When I reached the bend in the logging road, I started setting up. I was getting my muzzle loader ready, measuring powder, when I heard the coyotes start up maybe a couple hundred yards away. Now, coyotes are common in those woods. You hear them yipping and howling all the time. But this was different. They weren't making their usual hunting sounds or territorial calls. This was agitated, almost panicky yapping, the kind they make when they're alarmed or feel threatened. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they'd cornered something or were fighting amongst themselves. But then the tone changed. It got more frantic and then suddenly cut off. That's when the hairs on my neck stood up. In those woods, in the dark, your senses get heightened. I stood completely still, listening. The silence felt wrong somehow. Then I heard something moving through the underbrush, something big enough to make noise despite clearly trying to be quiet. It wasn't a deer. I've heard deer moving through woods hundreds of times. Deer make a certain pattern of sounds, quick, light steps with pauses. This was different, heavier, more deliberate, and I could hear branches being pushed aside, not breaking, just being moved. like something was carefully making its way through. That's when real fear hit me. I quickly packed up my stuff and backed up toward my truck, which was about 50 yards behind me. I didn't run. Something told me not to make sudden movements or noise. I just walked backward as quietly as I could, never taking my eyes off the direction of the sounds. When I reached my truck, I got in, locked the doors, and turned the key enough to get power, but didn't start the engine yet. I rolled down the window just a crack to listen better. The movement continued, getting closer to the road. I could still hear those weird, heavy footsteps and the sound of vegetation being pushed aside. Then I heard breathing, deep, heavy breathing that definitely wasn't from a deer or coyote. My hands were shaking as I turned the key and started the engine. I flipped on the headlights, and that's when I saw it. About 30 yards ahead, at the edge of where my headlights reached, something huge stepped out from between the trees. I'm 6'2", and this thing was much taller than me, probably 7.5 feet, maybe even 8. It had this massive frame with incredibly wide shoulders and arms that hung down way longer than a human should. It was covered in dark hair, not fur exactly, more like hair, mostly dark brown or black, but with these lighter streaks in places. Its back was rounded, and its head didn't sit on top of its shoulders like ours do. It was positioned more forward, giving it this hunched appearance. The thing that still haunts me is how it reacted to my headlights. It didn't bolt immediately. It paused, and I swear it was as surprised to see me as I was to see it. For about 10 seconds, which felt like an eternity, it just stood there at the edge of the light. I could hear its breathing even over my truck's engine. Deep, heavy breaths that made clouds in the cold air. Then it shifted its weight, and the way it moved was just wrong. Too fluid for something that size. It moved quickly to my left, slipping between trees that seemed too close together for something that big to fit through. But it did, with this disturbing agility. I sat in my truck, completely frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I couldn't even think straight. I just kept staring at the spot where it had disappeared, waiting for it to come back. After what must have been 15 minutes but felt like hours, I finally got the courage to put the truck in reverse. I backed up about 20 yards, turned around and parked facing the road out, but I didn't leave. Something told me not to try driving out in the dark. What if it was on the road? What if there were more of them? So I waited. I kept the engine running for heat and just sat there, jumping at every sound, watching the trees for any movement. I had my muzzle loader across my lap, though I'm not sure what good I thought that would do. One shot, and then what? When the sky finally started to lighten around 6:30, I felt brave enough to leave. I drove out slowly, scanning the woods on either side of the road. I never saw it again that morning, but I felt watched the entire time. This wasn't my first weird experience on that property, though it was definitely the most terrifying. About 3 years earlier, I was out there raccoon hunting with 2 friends and their dogs, well-trained hunting dogs that normally would chase anything that moved. We were near that same bend in the logging road when the dogs suddenly went rigid, tails between their legs, refusing to move forward despite commands from their owners. They just whined and pressed against our legs. That's when we heard it, rocks tumbling down a small slope about 50 yards away. Something big was walking up there where nothing should have been. It was pitch black and none of us had the guts to shine our lights in that direction. We just grabbed the dogs and got out of there. At the time, we convinced ourselves it was probably a bear, even though bears aren't common in that area. But after what I saw in 2014, I'm convinced it was the same creature. Since that December morning, I've done a lot of research on Bigfoot sightings. I know how that sounds. Before this, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed to have seen such a thing. But what I saw matches so many other descriptions. The height, the long arms, the sloped head, the ability to move quietly despite its size. I've been back to our hunting land since then. I still hunt there with my dad and brother. But I've never gone to that specific spot alone again. And I never hunt during the early morning darkness anymore. I wait until full daylight. The thing that bothers me most isn't just that I saw something that shouldn't exist. It's the intelligence I sensed in the encounter. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. The way it paused, assessed the situation, and then deliberately moved away. There was thought behind those actions. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe my eyes playing tricks in the low light. But then I remember the sound of it breathing, the way it moved, and that distinct silhouette against the trees. No bear moves like that. No person is built like that. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself if someone had told me this story before it happened. But I know what I saw, and I know there's something in those woods that science hasn't explained yet. I still get up in the middle of the night sometimes, thinking I hear that same heavy breathing outside my window. I know it's just my imagination, but part of me wonders if that thing somehow followed me home that day. Not physically, but in my mind. Like once you see something like that, you never really escape it. I don't have any photos or physical evidence. Everything happened too fast, and honestly, taking a picture was the last thing on my mind at that moment. All I have is what I saw and what I felt, and what I felt was a primal fear unlike anything I've ever experienced, the kind that makes you realize we're not always at the top of the food chain.